Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the third and final part of my love letter to Toy Story 3. We've spent the last few weeks celebrating this movie's 15th anniversary by deep diving into every single scene to highlight all the remarkable craftsmanship on display, from the plotting to the characters to the themes and beyond. But now we have finally arrived at the pièce de résistance, the chef d'oeuvre, the crown jewel that seamlessly ties the whole movie together. We are finally headed right into the exhilaratingly devastating third act of Toy Story 3. For those just joining us, I strongly recommend watching parts 1 and 2 so you have full context for my analysis, but for the rest of us, let's get this wagon train a-moving. Andy's toys are now on a one-way trip to the dump, but with only the main cast having fallen into the truck while trying to save Woody, which both has a logical justification and a meta-narrative justification. Logically, it makes sense for only them to have fallen in, as the other Sunnyside toys do not have any kind of long-standing emotional connection that would motivate them to risk their lives for these guys. And even though Barbie would of course want to jump in to help her friends, Ken holds her back because he has an emotional incentive to care more about her than everyone else, but is still horrified to see them shipped off to their inevitable demise, prioritizing the people he cares about most without making him seem completely heartless. And of course, in the meta, limiting which characters get sent to the dump allows the upcoming emotional powerhouse of an Incinerator scene to revolve exclusively around the most important toys in Andy's life, who the audience has been attached to for years while still being fully supported by the motivations of the characters themselves. And they hardly give you any time to process what's just happened before they immediately start throwing everything they have at the toys. There's a brief moment where they all use Buzz's glow-in-the-dark features, which I'm very happy to see they actually remembered he has in this movie, something which can't be said for all of them, to reunite and try to count heads, but they can't verify everybody's safety before yet another dumpster is picked up and hordes of trash start raining down from the sky. Woody, calm under pressure as always, doesn't hesitate to order everyone to get back up against the wall, but Buzz ignores him completely because even without doing a roll call, he knows they're not all accounted for.
Señorita! Señorita! ¿Dónde está?
This sequence of Buzz blitzing through the hurricane of garbage, seemingly entirely unfazed by the danger of being crushed to keep Jessie safe, is one of the most underappreciated moments for him across the trilogy, and something I can't help but admire, even if its presentation is intentionally on the cheesy side. That even when he's stuck in Spanish mode, his courage, tenacity, and ferocious protectiveness for the other toys, and especially Jessie, transcends any language barriers, and he still gets to be a badass hero. That being said, I can absolutely see people being disappointed that this still isn't technically the Buzz we know leading the charge in this scene, which ties into a broader issue some people have with Toy Story 3 in that Buzz doesn't really get much to do in this movie. And to an extent, I understand the frustration, because it's true that he categorically has the least to do in this film compared to the other two, where in the first one, his arc of self-discovery is one of the core conflicts of the story, and in the second one, he leads the B-plot. He is in charge of guiding the team across town to rescue Woody from Alan the Prospector. Whereas this time around, while Buzz does of course play a key role in the story when serving under Lotso's control, the character we love from the first two is absent for about a third of the runtime, as even after they get Buzz back on their side, he's still stuck in Spanish mode until the TV falls on him inside the garbage truck. However, while his role in Toy Story 3 is definitely diminished, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, as he still does have moments of triumph all to himself. Namely, figuring out how to free the toys from the trash bag, figuring out how to escape the caterpillar room with a truly brilliant feat of teamwork, his reconnaissance mission into the vending machine and holding his own against Lotso's crew for as long as he can, and taking charge of the dump, as without him, Woody wouldn't have been able to get Lotso out from underneath the golf bag. He may not have as much to do as usual, but what he does get to do is awesome. What I would ultimately say about Buzz's role in this movie is that because Toy Story 3 is more of an ensemble story than either of the other two, think of it more like the other toys being given more moments to come into their own so they all balance out to around the same level, rather than Buzz getting less. And his treatment in Toy Story 3 is absolutely not on par with his treatment in Toy Story 4. That's a common argument used to defend his brain damage in that film, that ever since the first movie, Buzz was actually always a stupid
little insignificant toy.
with 3 especially being no different than 4 in regards to how Buzz is treated, which is hilariously wrong in every possible way. Even if you really don't like how little Buzz gets to do in Toy Story 3, that is nowhere near on par with stripping him of his agency by forcing him to push his stupid buttons to make any kind of decision, making him dumb as a bag of rocks, and having his allegiance to the aforementioned buttons take priority over his bond with Woody, and leading to him abandoning him at the antique store instead of going for the obvious payoff, which is that if you want to do this stupid fucking inner voice thing, then make that be the moment where he stops listening to his buttons and follows his actual inner voice to make the choice of his own volition to help his friend. I'm never getting over that moment. It's so fucking stupid that Buzz would ever leave Woody behind. I can't. I actually can't. Anyway, regardless of all that, can you really say that him bravely charging across the garbage truck to rescue Jesse on a one ranger mission with shrapnel raining down upon him isn't absolutely amazing to watch? Until, of course, it isn't. So, a couple things about the TV falling on Buzz that I need to go over straight away before we move into the proper landfill sequence. First of all, Jesse and Woody being the first ones to reach the TV after it falls is a nice touch, since they would be the ones most strongly invested in making sure Buzz is okay. Second, it would be a ludicrously difficult task for a group of toys to be able to lift a television set off of Buzz, and they stay true to that in the animation of this scene, with it requiring the combined strength of every toy whose anatomy would allow themselves to help in order to even slightly get this thing off the ground. You can see their arms trembling like crazy as they're exerting the maximum amount of possible effort, and they're all lifting from the same side to focus their efforts in one specific area, using the floor of the truck as support to lean the TV in a certain direction rather than trying to lift it directly upwards. Third, sorry, Toy Story 4. This incident can't save your shitty character writing. A lot of people try to steelman Buzz's very minor case of serious brain damage in that movie by saying, well, what if he actually is suffering from cognitive impairment after the TV fell on his head at the end of the third movie? But that falls flat immediately, because in the Shredder scene that follows this, as well as all subsequent Toy Story tunes and holiday TV specials, we see Buzz maintaining his level-headed, intelligent decision-making even in high-stress scenarios, with only one very annoying exception.
Number 1.
Oh, no, one letter.
One syllable. Once upon a time.
1 + 1 is 1.
I think maybe it's pointing up.
Up.
Yeah.
Of course.
And finally,
That wasn't me, was it?
so, for as dumb as it sounds, I have absolutely no trouble at all buying the idea that this would work as a way to reset Buzz. Because in my experience, more often than not, if a piece of technology is malfunctioning, giving it a good smack tends to fix it. Percussive maintenance is a thing that exists no matter how backwards the logic appears on the surface. Plus, when Woody was frenetically flicking the switch back and forth trying to fix Buzz, he last left it in play mode, which is the setting for the Buzz we're all so familiar with, so it makes sense that would be the version he wakes up in after a hard reboot. You could argue it's convenience that there was something in this trash storm heavy enough to knock Spanish Buzz out of him, but I'd rebuke by saying that it would have been more unbelievable had he emerged from this entirely unscathed with nothing even remotely dangerous falling out of the dumpster, and this is simply the natural result of Buzz choosing to charge directly into the line of fire to rescue Jesse. And it kinda goes without saying, but it really is a testament to how talented the animators are that they can immediately telegraph what version of Buzz you're watching based purely on his facial expressions and how he moves. You'd still know exactly who was on screen even if I muted the sound. Especially with how stupidly funny all of Spanish Buzz's faces are. His personality comes through in every single shot. The toys take this brief grace period once the cyclone of trash subsides to celebrate Buzz having finally come back to them, but their reprieve doesn't last long as Rex brings him up to speed on where they are, and it sinks back in for everyone just how precarious of a situation they've gotten themselves into. The dump truck rolls through the gates of the Tri-County landfill, slowly screeches to a halt, and then jarringly jettisons its garbage out the backside, leaving the toys scattered amidst the wreckage as Woody slowly scales to the top of a nearby mound of trash and looks out over the hopeless, desolate wasteland that is the ingeniously chosen location for the climax of Toy Story 3. the dump. Which sounds so underwhelming when I say it like that because there's not much glamour or excitement to be found from a disgusting dump, but it is the most thematically rich place they could have chosen to set the finale of this story and, more importantly, the Toy Story trilogy as a whole. The prospector's promise from the end of Toy Story 2 that the toys would all end up in a landfill someday has finally been fulfilled, as has the toys' darkest fear from the beginning of the movie. That ultimate fear of one day being thrown away, ruined, and forgotten that had always been a lingering possibility nibbling at the back of their minds, from Woody's nightmare in Toy Story 2 to the close call at the beginning of Toy Story 3, all the repeated visuals of trash and garbage finally reaching their payoff and coming back around for the grand finale, pushing the toys to their absolute limits and confronting that ultimate fear head on, facing the natural endgame for a toy's life with the biggest bang imaginable. The idea of the toys being the last remnants of innocence and color surrounded by the gloomy contents of the toy box is taken to an entirely new level here, as Andy's toys stick out like a sore thumb amidst this hauntingly barren sight of misery and suffering, a landscape of annihilation and despair, feeling more vulnerable than ever before as the foggy darkness makes it feel like this place just goes on forever. Plastic bags floating everywhere, contributing to the eerily forsaken and bleak atmosphere even if you don't consciously realize their presence. But not every toy's morale is destroyed upon being released into the dump, because one toy's trash is another toy's claw. Giving us our second setup for the claw after the aliens first saw one at Sunnyside, replanting the seed in your mind without giving any time for it to really stick in for the long haul because they rip the aliens away from you almost as soon as they see it, and then almost immediately after that happens, a second bulldozer comes in and hurdles the rest of the toys off in a different direction and onto a conveyor belt headed into an unknown danger zone. What permeates this entire final act is a feeling of relentlessness. The pacing is electric because the characters are constantly tossed from one death-defying scenario to another, and anytime they think they get a second to breathe, it's instantly undercut with something even more deadly. We are far removed from the days of Woody and Buzz gleefully soaring through the air in pursuit of Andy's van, or Buzz and Bullseye racing to catch up to Woody and Jessie before the plane they're dangling from takes off. For as gripping and intense as those sequences are, they're also very uplifting and fun to watch and will leave anyone with a pulse smiling ear to ear by the time they reach their dramatic conclusions. But all that fantastical whimsy has been surgically removed now that we're here at the dump and the stakes feel dreadfully dire. No longer are the toys taking the horse by the reins and heroically charging into battle. They are afraid, they are out of their element, and they are being pushed to the brink of no return, scrambling for survival and just desperately trying to keep their heads above water. Here we've gone from one group of toys being carted away somewhere to another being dumped off down a different hole where it's still not clear exactly where they're being taken, but we get an excellent ramping up of the stakes as first Slinky is spontaneously pulled up to the ceiling and you immediately think that's the danger they have to avoid, being sucked away to yet another unknown destination while dodging all the magnetic objects flying around them, but then Woody climbs up over a mound of garbage and the music crescendos, revealing the real threat. The imminent, gruesome death they're all speeding towards. The Shredder. Now the magnet becomes their greatest friend in the world as Buzz immediately understands what they need to do and doesn't hesitate to tell everyone to grab hold of something metal, which given the sheer amount of garbage around them proves to not be that much of a challenge, even if finding a magnetic object is more cerebrally demanding for some toys than it is for others. The toys once again find themselves in a moment of safety with everyone pulled up to the ceiling, but then...
Help! Help me! I'm stuck!
And a feeling of dread washes over you the instant that hand pops out of the trash because you know exactly what Woody's about to do, even if you desperately don't want him to do it. Even if you want to see Lotso shredded to pieces, Woody would never let that happen. But his decision also isn't made in an instant. This is a contemplative moment for him because Lotso is by far the most deplorable toy he's ever had to deal with. But even for someone like him, being mercilessly eviscerated seems too harsh to Woody. Woody. He made sure Sid and the Prospector got their comeuppance, but he never condemned anyone to death, and even after everything Lotso's done, that doesn't mean he deserves to get shredded to scraps. So he lets go of the doorknob. He forfeits his safety and wades through the tidal wave of garbage with a shredder right on his tail because no toy ever gets left behind. He won't stand idly by and let another toy die if he's in a position to help. And it makes it even better that Buzz goes down there with him just seconds after Woody lets go. He's the only other toy in the world who'd ever be crazy enough to jump down and help Woody save Lotso despite being a direct victim of his horrific brainwashing because of how inseparable a team they've become after all they've been through together. And in keeping with the toy's limited strength, they free Lotso not through brute force but by using the magnet to their advantage. Another stroke of ingenuity by Woody and Buzz working together. Only through their combined efforts can they resist the pull of the magnet and free Lotso. The tension in this scene is absolutely pulse-pounding, and it's because there's no cheating whatsoever. Woody and Buzz's relative position to the shredder is 100% consistent in each subsequent shot, and your heart is thundering out of your chest with how close they cut this rescue. The sense of speed you get as the walls rapidly fly by the toys, the ever-present sense of danger that clouds your vision with how rapidly the blades are spinning around, the blinking yellow lights the camera kept low to the ground and close to the characters' faces to enhance that sense of claustrophobia, and then raising the camera high up into the shredder itself, making the toys appear small and helpless with debris being flung everywhere in front of your field of view, all contributing to the feeling of sheer terror and chaos flowing through their bodies, culminating in one immaculately stressful final shot, where there's a noticeable shift in animation between when they're resisting the force of the magnet to when they relax their arms and let it carry them upward, literally a hair's breadth away from certain doom as they ride up the shredder at the last possible second, then showing the golf bag torn apart the instant after they hit the ceiling to communicate just how close they were to being destroyed. It is phenomenal. It is by far the closest call of the trilogy and one of my all-time favorite moments in any movie I've ever seen. Even knowing how it all unfolds, I can't help but hold my breath as they get closer and closer to the shredder every time I watch it, and the relief I feel as they triumphantly soar above it to safety will never fail to be satisfying. There is, however, a pretty common question people ask about the immediate aftermath of such a harrowing sequence.
Guys?
That being, the other toys can simply let go of their magnetic objects to drop down, but Slinky himself is the magnetic object, so how did he detach himself from the ceiling? But it's important to remember that magnets don't remain attached to each other for eternity. You can separate magnets from each other if you have enough force, and if you recall, these toys have managed to simulate the force of a human before. If they all jumped on his coil and pulled down together, they could easily free him. Heck, Rex alone might even be enough to weigh him down. There's also no reason for Slinky to be pulled back up to the magnet after being separated because the trash belt is at a significantly lower position relative to the ceiling than the one prior to the shredder, and the clearest way to demonstrate this is just looking at how short the shredder appears in this shot compared to how tall it looks in this shot because of the difference in elevation. And finally, at long last, we arrive at the most climactic and emotionally devastating sequence of the entire film. The cruelest utilization of the momentary sense of security the toys feel between deadly obstacles as they drop down from the magnetic ceiling into a very coolly lit blue hall constructed to establish the strongest amount of contrast between the chaotic shredder set piece, illuminated by a sickly green tint often associated with Disney's most intimidating villains, and not the daylight at the end of the tunnel Rex thought it was because the trash truck comes at dawn, but the soul-stirringly frightening Incinerator. From out of the frying pan and into the fire as the intensely, overwhelmingly orange glow consumes the entire room, serving as a potent reminder of what's waiting for the toys at the top of the conveyor belt, leaving them with only one choice: to run like the wind as fast as they can, until Lotso gives them a sliver of hope, catching a glimpse of a giant emergency stop button with a blue flashing light, echoing Andy's primarily blue clothing, his blue car, the blue wallpaper in his room, and the blue atmosphere of the previous section. The button is literally signaling the comforting color of blue the toys have been racing to return to the entire time, and so Woody and Buzz extend a hand of good faith to help him start climbing. climbing, believing he would save their lives like they saved his just moments before. They want you to think he's gonna push the button, and you want to believe he's gonna do it. But he doesn't. He's too bitter that they dismantled his empire and took his eternal paradise of happiness away from him, and even saving his life, pulling him out of the jaws of the Shredder by the skin of their teeth, isn't enough to get him to push that button. There would be no hope of rebuilding his dictatorship. Even if he managed to find his way back to Sunnyside from the dump, Barbie, Ken, and the rest of his minions are now wise to his tricks, and he doesn't have any power over them anymore. They all saw firsthand that he never cared about anyone other than himself. He just used them all as meat shields. Woody and his friends took away every bit of control and importance he had built up over the years, but in this moment, when the toys are now totally powerless as he is confidently standing high above them with their fate entirely in his hands, he feels that rush of power once more. There is a solid argument to be made that Lotso wasn't always intending on betraying the toys, that he genuinely did want to hit that button and save everyone the entire time he was climbing up the ladder, until he got to the very top and had that feeling of control flow through his veins, and he slipped right back into his dictatorship one final time, showing no mercy and turning his back on Woody in the same way he turned his back on Daisy when he was replaced, condemning Big Baby and Chuckles to homelessness right alongside him out of jealousy that they still had a kid to go back to, in the same way that he's jealous of Woody and the gang still having a kid to go home to if he pushes that button and lets them live. Which is why his final, spine-chilling words to them are,
Where's your kid now, Sheriff?
he wants them all to suffer for attaching themselves to this mindset that there is value to be derived from being with a kid, condemning them to a fiery fate to literally and metaphorically destroy this ideology and prove his outlook on life to be correct. Because if Lotso saved the toys, it would validate the idea that their lives have value instead of being the trash he believes they are, solidifying with one last act that he is the dark foil for Woody's character, completely and totally consumed by his bitter jealousy and too far gone to change for the better, which then properly launches us into what I believe to be the most powerful thing Pixar has ever created, because by the time they realize Lotso isn't going to save them, it's too late to try to reach the ladder themselves, and they go tumbling backwards into the Incinerator. There was an audible gasp in my theater when Lotso's brow started to furrow, those haunting final words looping in all our minds as our hearts dropped to our stomachs. Woody and Buzz's blood-curdling screams ringing in our ears as it started to sink in that it was over. This is a totally impossible scenario for the toys to escape from, and any efforts they could make to climb away from the fire would ultimately be Herculean by nature. There's nowhere for them to run. With every step they take to escape, you can feel the ground giving way beneath them. Everybody is struggling to get a firm grip. With every chime of the music, you hear a propulsive, pulsating beat that mimics the menacing ticking of a clock, growing more and more intense as time is finally running out for these toys. And with every shot they cut to, you either get a wide angle of the roaring fire showing just how tiny the toys are in comparison, or a sickening close-up showing the terror on every one of their faces and the sheer size of such a monstrous force. It felt like my insides were caving in on themselves when I saw this for the first time, and for as much as I harped on some things being spoiled by the trailers earlier in this video, credit where credit is due, they never tipped their hand with this. In fact, they went out of their way to hide it by showing the clip of Woody falling over the edge, but with the background removed and the lighting adjusted to completely mask the fact that he was being launched into a fiery inferno. Usually when you consume any sort of story, particularly G or PG rated animated movies, even in the most masterfully crafted action sequences, no matter how tense you feel, there's always a subconscious reassurance you have in your minds that no matter what, the heroes aren't going to die. It may not apply if you're a kid, but most adults will have a feeling in the back of their heads that even Pixar would never burn all the characters alive to end off their trilogy. But that reassurance you usually have isn't here because what can they possibly do? Literally, what can be done here to avoid the fate they're rapidly sliding towards? The toys have absolutely zero options to be able to escape this vortex of fire sucking in everything around it. They try. Anybody's first instinct is to try, to turn and climb as fast as they can, with Woody reaching out to stop his friends from falling, but it slowly dawns on all of them, one by one, that this is it. Jessie asks,
What do we do?
And for the first time, Buzz doesn't have an answer. He's never faltered in the face of danger before, always able to calmly yet confidently lead the toys to victory time and time again. But now, he's speechless. And that's when Jessie knows they're out of time. When Buzz Lightyear lays down his laser, she knows there's no way out of this. Never before have these toys ever given up in the face of danger, as recently as just a couple minutes ago, which is why it's so impactful that they are now forced to do so here in this incinerator. After being repeatedly confronted with near-death experiences throughout the entire film, a calling for the end they can't run away from, they've finally reached the end of the line, and all their fears of abandonment, of being thrown away, of not being wanted or loved or needed, it all comes crashing down on them in one overwhelming flood of agonizing emotions as they realize there is no future for them. They are staring a horrifically painful death straight in the face, and in a heartbreakingly somber moment, they accept it with dignity. They choose not to die struggling, but to remain calm, just holding hands together as a family and offering what little comfort they can to each other in these final moments. And of all the toys, Woody would be the last one to throw in the towel. He would keep on fighting until the bitter end, and he does, until he looks around, seeing everyone having accepted their situation, and only when Buzz extends his hand, imploring him to join them and face the end together as a family, that he stops, and there's a wistful, gut-wrenching goodbye between Woody and Buzz in just these two shots. They can say a million words to each other without uttering a single syllable. This whole scene communicates so much about the characters with masterfully nuanced animation and zero dialogue from the point that Jessie asks this question. This is the moment, after everything they've been through, after enduring such an excruciating experience at the daycare, which necessitated everyone working together, that allows them to finally and truly bond as a family. Something most clearly and sufficiently demonstrated when Woody accepts that hand from Buzz that he previously refused when all the toys were fractured. Any previous animosity or bickering they had is pushed to the side. Mr. Potato Head and Ham both take Rex's hands in their own, even when they were always berating him and getting on his case. In the first movie, Potato Head even specifically asks in a mocking manner if he had to hold hands with his moving buddy, but here he takes Rex's hand without a moment of hesitation. Buzz finally takes Jessie's hand in his own after being too petrified to make a move for years, but it's only as they're staring death in the face and there's no happily ever after waiting for them that he's able to do it. Everyone is paired up with the perfect companions in this scene, with Woody holding hands with the oldest friend he had from the early days of Andy's room and the most significant toy he's ever formed a bond with. Yet he also stands alone to face the fire while everyone else has someone they can lean on for love and support. The lingering sense of dread and imminent death goes on for the exact amount of time needed to make you doubt yourself. They hold on the moment for just long enough. They get just close enough to the flames. The music swells and the sullen acceptance among the characters makes you second guess any subconscious reassurance you thought you had and wonder if Pixar really would dare to go that far. And that, in that fleeting moment when it looks like they might actually commit to such an atrocity and your guard is down, That is when they bring in... I really do try my best to not overuse this word, but I mean it when I say that every single thing about this final payoff is perfect. First of all, the contrast I mentioned previously of how the toys stick out like a sore thumb surrounded by the already ground up chunks of garbage would make it much easier for the aliens to spot them, especially when motion is quite easy to track and they had been climbing in the opposite direction that the garbage was sliding moments before joining hands in solidarity. As for how they managed to escape the bulldozer's trajectory, we can see them bounce up quite a bit when they're first rammed into as opposed to the other toys who just sorta settle into place upon impact. And toys as bouncy and light as the aliens could easily escape the bulldozer, especially when they have the single-minded claw focus that the aliens do. But broadly, what makes me say this payoff is perfect is how easily this last-second rescue could have cheapened such a beautifully harrowing sequence by punctuating it with a rosy, happily ever after ending. By all accounts, it is screaming the phrase Deus Ex Machina at maximum volume with how seemingly out of nowhere this claw is. But it doesn't fall into those trappings because, for one thing, they lean into the meaning of the phrase as literally as possible because the translation of Deus Ex Machina from Latin to English is God from the machine, which, from the perspective of the aliens, is exactly what this thing is. They've always regarded this machine as a divine celestial being governing who would go and who would stay. The claw is a literal hand of God coming to rescue the characters with a choral chant in the score to boot, casting that old familiar blue light of safety around the area of our heroes. Of course, that would all still ultimately ring hollow if the claw truly did come out of nowhere to save the day, but it didn't. Within this movie, it was foreshadowed from as early as the toy's first arrival at Sunnyside, and then this specific claw was set up just minutes prior before the toys got sent down the conveyor belt, but you completely forget about it and the aliens because of all the chaos that unfolds in the subsequent Shredder scene, but the setup is still there somewhere in your brain, so when the claw comes in to save the day, you don't think, where did this come from? You get a burst of satisfaction when you remember that little breadcrumb they dropped for you, so you would keep it in your memory without actively remembering it throughout this nail-biter of a sequence, and then understand how everything fell into place. Lee Unkrich actually thought that flagging the existence of a claw in this landfill as flagrantly as they do here would be giving the game away too much and would therefore dampen the impact of the moment when it shows up in the incinerator, but because of how frenetic this entire final act is, and because two different groups of toys get swept away in two different directions almost immediately after the claw is shown, I am willing to bet the overwhelming majority of audiences never gave this moment a second thought when watching the movie for the first time. And even if you don't quite realize exactly what's happening right away, like the toys don't, then this shot is what will definitely connect the dots together for you. Having all your characters be rescued at the 11th hour without hamstringing your story by employing a typical Deus Ex Machina trope is such an impossibly thin tightrope to walk, and that it managed to keep its balance the whole way across is what makes this so perfect. The foundation is there to structurally support why and how this is happening. The concept of a godly claw scooping up toys and taking them to a better place was there as early as the first Toy Story, while the physical, mechanical claw was foreshadowed, reestablished, and then paid off all just within Toy Story 3. Thematically, it doesn't rob the characters of their defining choices during the ending, and finally, this also pays off the aliens' debt to Mr. Potato Head from the end of Toy Story 2.
You have saved our lives. We are eternally grateful.
You saved our lives.
And we are eternally grateful.
Only instead of being at the mercy of the claw choosing who would go and who would stay, this time the aliens were the ones to take the controls in their own hands. Also, these claws actually exist at dumps. They didn't invent that specifically for this movie, it just works out perfectly that the thematic endgame for the toys also features the most perfect opportunity to pay off setups from both the previous two movies and once again make it seem as if all three films were planned from the start to be one huge story even when we know they weren't. All 3 Toy Story climaxes are sensational for different reasons. Toy Story's climax is the most satisfying, seeing Woody and Buzz soar through the air, falling with style together after all the ups and downs of their relationship. Toy Story 2's climax is the most action-packed and, well, awesome, for lack of a better word, seeing both Woody and Buzz achieve in the real world the same types of fearless heroics as their fictional counterparts. And Toy Story 3's climax is the most emotionally gripping and powerful in seeing the toys accept their mortality under the most extreme stakes imaginable. The fact that Pixar didn't actually incinerate the toys doesn't make this moment any less meaningful, because it's not about the question of whether they'd burn alive. It's about what this moment means for the toys as a family. Buzz and Jessie having the courage to be open about their feelings with each other, Potato Head, Rex, and Ham putting aside their differences in a moment of true crisis, Potato Head accepting the aliens as his kids after being aggravated by their presence in the last movie, and everyone just finally coming together and bonding after all they've endured over the years. Not the kind of twisted family Lotso created at Sunnyside.
Why don't you come on back? Join our family again.
But a real family who loves and cares for each other and who won't abandon each other no matter what, which is why Lotso's pyramid of fear and lies he called a family is who ultimately knocks him off his throne and sends him to the dump. And his lack of a family leads him to his ultimate punishment, but the toys' undying loyalty to each other is what saves their lives as the aliens rescue them from the incinerator, making each climax the perfect capstone for each respective Toy Story adventure. Lee Unkrich has said in the past that the thing he's most proud of in this film is this scene in the incinerator, and for good reason. It's a beautifully powerful moment of acceptance and dignity for the toys, and I could never imagine calling this childish on any level. But not everyone was pleased with how incredibly intense this scene is, particularly parents. You may have heard this one before. It goes something like, "Thanks, Pixar! My children are gonna be scarred for life now thanks to Toy Story 3. Did you forget you were making a children's movie? Why is it so dark?"
I think we go back to number 2 a lot. Yeah, I think it is. I know 3's a little scary. If you didn't like 3, this one's pretty emotional. You guys are gonna find this one really hard to take.
I don't know why specifically Toy Story 3 comes under fire. It's funny because darker themes, subject matter, and straight up horrifying sequences are no strangers to the world of Disney movies or child-oriented films in general. Hot take, this enormous barracuda in Finding Nemo was way more disturbing to my little mind than the incinerator scene ever was.
This is a pretty tough scene though.
In terms of the intensity?
Yeah.
You know, I never, ever doubted it. We might have adjusted the way we did it, but just the scene itself, I never doubted it, because it's much more truthful. And Bambi did it. There were so many other flavors of what a Pixar film could be. And I was pretty sure this could be one of them. And that if we were lucky, it would give license to do that even more.
But even if we lived in a timeline where Toy Story 3 was the first Pixar movie to ever attempt to push the boundaries of what they could put the characters through while still maintaining a general audience rating, I suppose the difference between you and me is that I think kids are strong enough to handle this stuff without having a meltdown in the theater. And I also feel like, more often than not, the ones who have the most extreme reactions to this scene aren't the kids, but the parents who are trying to see the world through their kids' eyes in the hopes of shielding them from anything remotely sensitive. But I saw this opening day when I was 7, and I was perfectly fine. Well, fine. I was still an emotional wreck in the moment, but my point is that there was no lasting psychological damage as a result of this scene, and I understand that's essentially the, "well, it runs fine on my machine" response to criticisms, and that statistically not every single kid around the world will come out of this scene unaffected. And if a child is severely frightened after watching the toys almost get burned alive in the incinerator, then that's a perfectly valid response for them to have, and I would never want to diminish that experience. But ultimately, I was scared by many things in media when I was a kid. For instance, Elmo getting sucked into the trash world in The Adventures of Elmo and Grouchland.
Have a nice trip.
You're laughing. I'm sharing my deepest trauma with you and you're laughing. That's not a joke. That shit messed me up when I was 4 years old. My favorite Sesame Street character was tumbling through a weird unknown tunnel and ended up in a terrifying land full of trash. Wait, was Toy Story 3 inspired by Elmo? And memes aside, that was really scary for me when I was a kid.
Wait, stop the film, stop the film! What's happening to Elmo?
Oh, don't worry, Bert. That's just the way to get to Grouchland.
Oh.
Sorry, Ernie. You tried your best, but I was still inconsolable. And to be fair, this is also the film where Elmo almost straight up fucking dies at the end in a giant crushing device, and all the other characters are utterly horrified for him as he's clinging onto the chain for dear life. Dude, I rewatched this movie for the purposes of this video, and it is such a fever dream. Half the Sesame Street characters get thrown in prison at one point. What on earth were they smoking when they made this? Hell, even within Toy Story 3, if you'll recall from last time, I absolutely couldn't stand to watch the toddlers abuse the toys during the rough play sequence, but I, and my parents, would have been insane to blame the film for my emotional response to these sequences. Filmmakers can't possibly cater to every single family around the world, nor should they be expected to, which is not to say they have carte blanche to put literally anything into their story, and if a kid is scared to death by it, then oh well, that's life, kid, tough cookies. I do believe there are certain things that young children shouldn't be exposed to, and if they had shown actual gore or mutilation or something sexually explicit, then I would similarly ask what in the world Pixar was thinking. But the incinerator scene is not even remotely equivalent to those things. Is it still unbelievably intense? Absolutely. I was left beyond breathless when I watched it for the first time as a kid. But in addition to such an extraordinarily extreme emotional moment being wonderfully counterbalanced by the triumphant rescue from the claw, this doesn't cross any unforgivable lines of intensity, certainly not more so than anything else Disney or Pixar has made before this point. Have fun explaining to your kids what was happening in this scene after the credits roll. I'm sure that was a fun car ride home. Kids are a lot stronger than you think they are. Let them experience a broader range of emotions. Let them be exposed to things a little more intense than a happy-go-lucky fantasy world.
There's nothing in Toy Story 3 that's damaging. Yes, there are some very intensely emotional moments, but I think it's good to expose kids to things like that. Life is sad sometimes, and we don't see anything wrong with being honest about that.
That being said, I completely understand why so many parents were calling up the MPAA complaining the movie should have had a more mature age rating than it did, because it is absolutely ludicrous that Toy Story 3 somehow got away with just a G rating. You're telling me Up was more deserving of a PG than this? A little bit of blood and off-screen death and crazy over-the-top action sequences with characters in standard fantastical levels of peril versus an entire family almost fucking burning alive slowly and painfully and embracing each other, fully believing this is the moment when they will die. How? Literally how? Anyway, Ham and Slink understandably just want to have a nice and pleasant conversation with Lotso after he tried to kill them, but Woody remains the voice of reason and reassures them he's not worth being given the time of day by them, which is a good lesson for anybody watching, that sometimes it's better to just go about your life than it is to let yourself get bogged down by all the jerks you've encountered over the years. But it wouldn't be very satisfying as an audience member if we didn't get to see what ultimately became of him after all this, so we cut to Lotso trying to make his daring escape, but gets stopped short as a friendly dump truck driver spots him on the side of the road.
I had me one of these when I was a kid. Strawberries.
Little weird, Lotso still has a scent that powerful after being subjected to the horrors of the garbage dump, but I guess this guy's nose has just been trained to tune out that scent given his occupation. Regardless, the driver ties Lotso to the front of his garbage truck, which is the best comeuppance they could have possibly given him, not only because it serves as a real-world parallel to what garbage truck drivers actually do with toys they find.
This idea of Lotso ending up tied to the front of a garbage truck, everyone around the world might not be familiar with this, but in a lot of big urban areas, you'll often see garbage trucks with stuffed animals tied to the front. You see them all over New York City. And they do that because, the garbage men will be emptying the garbage and they'll find a poor stuffed animal that's been thrown away. And rather than just throwing it away, they'll give it a little dignity and tie it to the front of their truck. It's not to be mean to it, it's to save it from the garbage and have a little mascot on the front of their truck.
It not only brings Lotso's journey in this film full circle with his introduction at Sunnyside, where he was spilled out of the back of a toy dump truck, truck, as if it was just making the rounds to drop off the trash. But doing this to Lotso isn't just giving someone a cruel punishment for cruelness' sake. It's not a weird, uncomfortable, or thematically vacant endgame for the villain. It's taking a character who always needed to be in complete control of every aspect of his life and stripping it away so that he now lacks control over any aspect of his life, even the movement of his own limbs, so that he can't hurt anyone ever again. And even better, his fate is in the hands of someone who loves him so much that he will not let him go, which is exactly what he thought he wanted all along. And it adds an extra layer of meaning behind this line.
Might want to keep your mouth shut.
He got exactly what he thought he wanted, only now his spirit has been broken just as badly as all the toys who became a part of his family. So while keep your mouth shut is a sound bit of practical advice, it can also mean be careful what you wish for. Some people argue not that Lotso's fate was simply vapid cruelty for the sake of vapid cruelty with no deeper meaning, but that Lotso's punishment wasn't cruel enough, that he got off too easy and deserved something worse, like being incinerated the way he tried to burn all of Andy's toys. And I understand someone thinking at face value that simply being tied to the front of a truck isn't a particularly appropriate punishment for a tyrannical dictator such as Lotso, but I promise you this is far, far worse than if he had simply been incinerated. Lotso is going to be slowly deteriorating for an indefinite period of time, the other toys by his side serving as a visual indicator of what he's going to look like after a few months, dealing with all the insects and detritus flying at him all the time, and the sensation of being baked alive from how hot that grill will get because of the direct sunlight or other natural elements depending on weather conditions, which is the same feeling he tried to condemn the other toys to having in the fiery pits of the incinerator. And we know for a fact that toys are capable of feeling burnt. And even if one day he's ever let go from the grill of the truck, he'll probably be so withered and broken after all that time he won't have the strength to go anywhere anymore, just like all the toys that got broken into submission in the caterpillar room. Lotso will be begging for the incinerator by the time this guy is done with him. But whatever happens to Lotso in the future, the toys don't have to worry about it because, like Woody said,
he's not worth it.
They have bigger fish to fry, primarily the issue of what's to come of them once they get back to Andy's house. They've survived Sunnyside and the landfill, but they still don't have an ideal solution figured out for their future. And Woody, especially, is approaching the culmination of his internal debate throughout the movie, that after having one last grand adventure with everybody and bonding with his family in such a tremendously powerful incinerator scene, Woody's starting to question whether what Andy wants is really what's best for everyone. The other toys are completely committed to Andy after seeing how bad of an idea Sunnyside was for them, which makes sense, but Woody doesn't explicitly agree with this. He just says,
I just hope he hasn't left yet.
But we'll wait to talk about everything going through Woody's head until we get back home, because there is a lot to unpack there. For now, we have to solve the problem of how they're even going to get home in the first place, because Mrs. Potato Head informs them through the use of her other eye that Andy's almost done packing, and they can't possibly get halfway across town on foot before he leaves. I really love this as a solution. I love that Sid's role in Toy Story 3 wasn't just a blink and you miss it throwaway cameo with no bearing on the story. His presence earlier in the movie actually helps set up the ending, as Sid's unique personality is easily identified by the toys, so they can use him to hitch a ride back home, already knowing that his route will take him through Andy's neighborhood. And early in the morning is the exact time of day that the trucks tend to pick up the garbage. And like I said in the first part, it's the Tri-County Sanitation Service, so they'd naturally be moving all over the county to pick up people's garbage. But now, thanks to Sid, the toys have rolled right back up to Andy's house with just minutes to spare before he heads off to college. But even with the ticking clock, the toys still need to get cleaned off before they present themselves to Andy again. In keeping with the emphasis on hygienic habits from Woody's earlier escape, I'm very happy that they took the time to show the toys washing themselves off after rolling around in the filthy dump, and being horribly maimed and mutilated by the toddlers. Can you imagine if they didn't do this and Andy opened up the box only to immediately pass out from the revolting stench. So after a brief lesson in hygiene for the younger viewers, we get a throwback shot to Toy Story 2 with the toys returning through Andy's window the same way they left it in that movie, because
I might be old, but I still got a spring in my step.
And as everyone hops back down, we can see that Andy's room has now been resaturated with warm light streaking through the glass and illuminating the walls and floor, in contrast to how dour the atmosphere was at the beginning of the film, which, combined with the stars on the walls from Toy Story 2 being more clearly visible than they were before now that all his posters have been taken down, helps to reinforce Andy's room as being the safe home it always was for the toys. But now, after their illuminating adventure, they can finally see it that way again, and the lighting illuminates the room in response to demonstrate that. With less than 20 minutes left in the movie's runtime, we're rapidly approaching the big, emotional ending everyone always raves about. And I've somehow managed to find 5 whole hours of things to talk about before that point. How about that? But we still have one more scene to discuss before we reach that ending, and it's Woody's final epiphany, which is just as, if not arguably more important to the story than the actual ending itself. There are 3 different goodbye moments in Toy Story 3. One between Woody and the other toys, one between Andy and his mom, and one between Andy and his toys, and especially Andy and Woody. They all need to emotionally land, and they all need to feel real, and they can't feel like a completely satisfying conclusion until the very last one, but it also still needs to feel like any one of them could be the actual ending of the movie, because nobody knows where the toys are going after this scene. But the writer's brilliance shines through yet again, as in spite of any random gusts of wind, or hammer space lockets, or cheap bucket tricks, they managed to stick the landing when it counted the most. We start things off with Woody finally extending his hand to Buzz, not only mirroring the one he rejected at Sunnyside by initiating the handshake himself this time, but also their very first handshake at the end of the first movie. And the toys are all given a happy and healthy farewell with each other to contrast the messy and unsatisfying breakup they had on their first day at Sunnyside, where Woody gets a brief moment with each toy that's carefully tailored to each of their personalities. His oldest friend Slinky wishes him a fun time at college. The sarcastic and sly Pig Ham suggests he better not have too much fun. Rex, someone so driven by Andy's love he had to be forcibly removed from his cell phone earlier, and who danced with joy when he discovered Andy still cared about him, encourages Woody to take care of Andy for them. And Potato Head is just as snarky as always.
Tell him to get a haircut.
Sure thing.
With Jessie and Buzz saved for last, the two Woody has most strongly connected with over the years, wanting to make sure Jessie will be okay in the enclosed space of the attic, which she assures him she will in accordance with how she handled herself in the toy box at the beginning of the movie, with a not-so-subtle joke about her knowing about Buzz's Spanish mode.
My what?
And with Andy seconds away from walking in and forcing them apart, potentially forever, Buzz and Woody have one final moment together. One last chance to say their farewells, staring into each other's eyes, scrambling to figure out the best thing to say when they could be the last words they ever speak to each other. So with all that in mind, Buzz chooses to say,
"You know where to find us, cowboy."
Treating it as a see you later rather than a goodbye. But knowing that it might still end up being that, Woody pauses before climbing into the box to share one last smile with his friends, before Andy and his mom come into the room and we get our second goodbye sequence. Silence. Deafening, potent silence as Andy and his mom step into the room so you can fully feel the weight of what is, for many, the most emotionally resonant moment of the movie.
Andy.
There's a prevailing sentiment and discourse surrounding Toy Story 3 that people only like it because of a nostalgic attachment they have to the first two movies. That if someone only watched the third one in isolation, or binged the trilogy in a single day without that long-standing connection to these characters, it would ring hollow in comparison. And, of course, any finale to any story is obviously going to have a much stronger impact on the audience if they've already been attached to the characters for a long time, and Toy Story 3 was specifically written with the understanding that the kids who grew up with the first two movies and these characters would be much older now, at a place in their lives that allows them to easily insert themselves as Andy or his mom during this final sequence. It is a point of praise to highlight how the story is most effective for those intimately familiar with the events of the previous two installments, because I hate when writers try to dumb down their stories to cater to a wider audience at the expense of those who have stuck with the series since its inception. Not to say you should be entirely dismissive of newcomers, but you shouldn't be afraid to lay down payoffs that only mean something to you if you were there to experience the setup. Also, this ending is not going to be exclusively effective for longtime fans. No parent needs to have seen those first two films to be in Andy's mom's shoes during this scene and feel that heart-stopping flood of emotions upon seeing your kid's room emptied out, as the realization finally sinks in that they're all grown up and they don't need you anymore. And for the same reasons, you don't need to be a die-hard Toy Story fan to get emotional at what's about to happen in a few minutes. You don't need to be a college student or the parent of one for this goodbye between Andy and his mom to hit you right where it hurts most. Because this is when it starts to crystallize for both Woody and the audience what the film has really been about the entire time. Not a Prison Break movie, not a cautionary tale of power and ego or anything like that. Though they are still parts of the film's identity, the emotional core of Toy Story 3 is one of change, acceptance, and the inherent transience of human connections. Per Pixar's own storytelling rules, the heart of the story and the reason why it must be told, the burning belief within that the story feeds off of, that the compelling and fleshed out characters, tight plot, and every other element of the movie work to communicate, which speaks to something intensely valuable about the human experience that will stick with the viewer when they leave the theater, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. And I think Michael Arndt said it best in his post-mortem video regarding why people connect to Toy Story 3's messaging so strongly. Everybody, at some point in their lives, experiences what Andy and his mom are feeling right now. We all form connections with people. We make friends in school, we bond with teachers, we find love, and in the moment, these connections feel like the most important things in the world to us. We grow up together with these people, we learn major lessons from them, and we experience some of the biggest changes of our lives with them. And yet, a lot of the time, the connections don't last. People move away, people pass on, or sometimes people just naturally drift apart and go their separate ways. Sometimes you'll find each other again later in life, but sometimes that detachment is permanent and you don't ever see each other again. Something I've experienced firsthand countless times over. And whenever that happened to me, I found myself thinking the same way Lotso did. Asking myself, was that friendship real? Was the love real? Or was it all just a temporary, artificial, purely transactional kinship where you interacted with each other just to have someone to talk to? Much like how Lotso being replaced led to him viewing every toy's relationship with their owner as a business transaction. Because surely if the love was real, then you'd still be in each other's lives, which is what Lotso feels when he sees another version of himself being lovingly cuddled by Daisy. That if she ever really loved him, she wouldn't have replaced him as easily as she would have replaced a pencil, and so he concludes that she didn't. And maybe you've also thought that if your old friends from high school were able to so effortlessly move on to college and make new friends that serve the same intimate role in their lives that you used to, that maybe your friendship wasn't really genuine after all. And that uncertainty is something Woody has been grappling with the entire movie, even if he didn't want to admit it to himself or his friends, and it's what makes Lotso's speech at the dumpster sting all the harder, because they viewed the concept of love in the same way, that to love someone is to always be with them as a part of their lives, but if Andy really loved his toys, then why would he be so willing to leave them behind? Woody's been wrestling this whole time between his loyalty to his friends and his loyalty to Andy, because the dichotomy was either that he went to Sunnyside to be there for them, or did what Andy wanted and went to college to be there for him. He didn't believe that there were any other options. But this final moment where he watches Andy and his mom say goodbye with the promise that they'll always be together finally clears the fog in his brain and gives him the solution he needs to fix everything and set it all straight before it's too late. I've lost a lot of connections throughout my life. Of all the bonds I've formed with my classmates, neighbors, and whoever else in my life, no matter how much we valued each other's company at the time, there's only a handful of them I still regularly talk to. Some others I check in with every once in a while, others I haven't spoken to in over a decade, and some of whom are now nothing more than a distant memory to me. So much has changed just in the world around me, and the movie theater I was lined up outside of early in the morning of June 18th, 2010 to see Toy Story 3 doesn't even exist anymore. The building may still be there, but a few years ago it was acquired by a different company, and the interior design has since been revamped into something totally new and far more modern. Something very vibrant and beautiful, but something that also no longer resembles the memories I formed from not just that summer, but every other time I went to see a movie at that theater as a kid. Change is an inherent part of life, and for as scary and hard as it can be to accept, it's what allows us to develop as people. Every last one of those relationships, the good and the bad, have all contributed to making me who I am today as an adult. What Woody wanted was to be able to stay with Andy and be there for him because he didn't want to leave him and because that was what Andy thought he wanted for himself. If you look closely at each movie in this trilogy, every lesson Woody learned stems from that first big speech he gave to the toys in the original staff meeting.
No one's getting replaced. It doesn't matter how much we're played with. What matters is that we're here for Andy when he needs us. That's what we're made for, right?
Because the platitudes he spouted in the first film were so easy to preach with passionate conviction when done from a position of seemingly irreplaceable power. But his journey across the trilogy is spent challenging that position, forcing him to confront those same fears he tried to reassure others about and make peace with them for himself. Being replaced, how often he's played with, and a burning desire to always be there for your kid. But in Toy Story 3, following his crisis of belief in Toy Story 2, Woody became so intensely fixated on always being there for Andy that he forgot the second part of the mantra, to always be there for Andy when he needs him. And he finally comes to accept that Andy doesn't need him anymore, but he can still be with Andy in his heart, because staying connected to the people who matter most to you is essential, and letting them go doesn't make life or those relationships any less meaningful. None of that is something you can't connect with if you are not a college student or a parent, or if you're not intimately familiar with the previous entries in the series. The extra element of emotion is there for longtime fans, but the themes and messaging of this film are universal sentiments that can be applied to anybody, even if this is your first Toy Story movie. There's a much greater significance in forming that bond with someone than adopting the worldview of someone like Lotso at a place like Sunnyside, viewing human connection as a transactional facade. The kids and toys may technically be happy in the butterfly room, but neither of them will ever feel truly fulfilled the way others do. You want to know why the main thrust of the story is centered around a prison escape? You want to know what the Incinerator scene is really here for? They're both visceral and inescapable representations of the toys' journey throughout this film. When they first start ascending to the top of the final conveyor belt, Rex looks to the orange glow and thinks that it's daylight. The doe-eyed, glamorized aspirations and hopes for their future they've been chasing after, when in reality, it's the future they fear most that comes for them eventually. Sure, the escape from Sunnyside was all remarkably intelligently plotted, but what was it all for? How does all this serve the overall narrative? Because it's a physical manifestation of how the toys have felt for the last decade of their lives. Trapped. Trapped in the state of being toys who no one wants to play with. Whether it's in Andy's toy box, or struggling for survival in a trash bag, or locked behind the bars of Sunnyside, everywhere they turn to for a way out of this vortex of misery just leads them to another dead end. Buttercup said it best himself. There is no way out. That no matter how hard you try to fight it, no matter how much you try to run away from the inevitable, you can't escape the end that comes for us all. And that's the most vital takeaway from the Incinerator sequence. The toys coming to terms with their own mortality and the inevitability of Andy growing up. It's the moment when Woody begins to internalize the fact that he and the toys will always need to support each other because they're stronger together, but that Andy doesn't need them anymore. It's a bittersweet reality, but one he must accept in order to move forward. Woody thought he had accepted his fate in Toy Story 2, but sometimes it's easier to accept an abstract concept of something than it is to accept the actualization of that concept. You can steel yourself for a performance, feeling ready to take on the world, but then completely freeze when you actually take the stage and feel the overpowering heat of the lights bear down upon your skin. You can understand that someday, inevitably, you will lose beloved members of your family, but to actually see them on their deathbed and be with them in their final moments is a whole other matter entirely. It's easy to think you've come to terms with something difficult when it exists solely in the abstract of your mind and you don't have to deal with the consequences in the moment. That is the promise of Toy Story 2. The toys think that they'll be ready to face their end together when that day eventually arrives, and then they immediately turn right around to resume their joyful lives with a big band performance distracting them from the inevitability of their fates. It's like Woody and Ham told us at the beginning. They all knew this day was coming, but now it's here, and it makes the toys bonding together so important. That big scene where Lotso finally unmasks himself and Sunnyside's true nature for all the toys to see doesn't happen until almost exactly halfway through the movie, because the core hook of the story's conflict isn't that the toys have to break out of Sunnyside, it's that this family has been completely fractured on the precipice of Andy's departure, and being thrust into Sunnyside daycare, being forced to confront their fears in such a literal and visceral way. All of this exists to give the toys a chance to work through their struggles, ultimately proving that in the face of so much uncertainty and change, through whatever rifts and disagreements they may have, what matters most is the bond they share with each other, and that they can face their future, whatever it may be, no matter how terrifying, together. It can be cripplingly hard to accept, but this feeling of abandonment is inevitable for all of us. Losing your friends, losing your family, or even just watching your kids grow up as the years go by and become their own full people to start a life for themselves. Fearing Andy's departure the same way a parent would fear the inevitable loss of a kid whom they cared for deeply and knew would one day outgrow them. The toys may be physically dependent on having a kid, but they also serve the emotional and spiritually important role of a parent. It's a metaphor that's been the driving force of the series ever since the very first movie. Because when you're a kid, you aren't always privy to your parents' personal lives. They shield you from being exposed to the cold, harsh, unforgiving world they have to navigate. They don't burden you with their own struggles materialistically or mentally. and you don't always appreciate everything they do for you day in and day out. In the same way that Andy will never know the impossible hoops the toys have consistently jumped through all for him. And even though they know that Andy won't hold on to his toys forever, and one day he won't need them anymore the same way he used to, they still love and care for him all the same, just like parents do for their own kids. In the end, nobody wants to let go. Nobody wants to say goodbye because of how painful that experience is. And when you find yourself in a relationship, it's practically inevitable that you'll feel hurt at some point. But to hurt is to know that relationship actually meant something. And all of that, everything running through Woody's head when he's in that box, culminates in his final choice. He seizes this moment, while Andy is distracted saying goodbye to Buster, to write a note that will course-correct the toy's future, frantically glancing back toward the college box, fearing whether he has enough time to get back inside before Andy turns around. Or at least, that's what they want you to think is running through his mind. But before you can ponder this brief glance back for too long, Andy walks over to the box and is relieved to discover when he opens it that his toys weren't really destroyed after all. Now, at this moment, we still don't know what Woody wrote on that note. It is there, if you go frame by frame and pause it, both in this shot and when Andy grabs the box from the passenger seat, but when watching for the first time, uninterrupted without the aid of a pause button, there's no way for you to know where he wants Andy to donate these toys. There was no indication in a flashback or dialogue or anything what exactly Woody was thinking about when he grabbed that Sharpie, and I didn't have the foggiest clue what was about to happen when I saw this for the first time, and I'd posit most other people didn't either. So nobody except Woody knows where Andy's driving to right now. Not even Andy himself. But all the pieces fall perfectly into place once he gets out of the car, attic box in hand, with one last act of misdirection as we pan inside the college box, making you think Woody's still in there, overseeing the fruits of his labor, and Andy approaches the gate to see...
Don't go in there! The bakery is haunted! Shh! Are you crazy? You'll wake up all the ghosts!
Another surprise carefully masked by the trailers. Clips from this final scene were shown in the marketing.
Woody's no ordinary toy. He's brave.
We gotta get you home before Andy leaves tomorrow!
But the framing is adjusted to make it look like Bonnie isn't even there, or they might have just straight up removed her model from the shot. All so they can keep this completely under wraps and then rip the rug out from under you one last time before the credits roll. So much has happened since Woody was first taken to Bonnie's home. So many nail-biting close calls, so much heart-stopping drama, and so many emotionally draining sequences that by this point, most people will probably have forgotten she was even in the film at all. But they utilized the exact same trick on Bonnie that they used to set up the claw, to dangle the truth in front of your face and then still manage to surprise you when it's time for the payoff. The moment when Andy looks over to see Bonnie playing with her toys, then smiles with a feeling of satisfaction is so important because upon him reading the note, he still really isn't sure about giving away his toys.
So, you really think I should donate these?
It's up to you, honey. Whatever you want to do.
This is not an easy decision for him to make because he doesn't want to just carelessly hand down his toys to some random kid. But when he looks at Bonnie, he sees himself. He feels an innate human connection with her despite having never seen her before, with her hesitance and fear upon looking back to meet Andy's gaze revealing a hint of apprehensiveness to her personality. Both her and Andy were seemingly introverted kids who found more comfort in escaping to a fictional world of their own creation, so seeing Bonnie putting on the same kind of vivid, fantastical, imaginative shows that he used to reassures him that this absolutely is the best place for his toys to end up, and that he's making the right decision in doing what he's about to do for as hard as it's gonna be for him. That being, to give away all of his toys to Bonnie, a very special kid for whom it wouldn't be out of place to receive a visit from Andy because it was established earlier that the families clearly know each other and are somewhat closely connected, and in giving her the toys, Andy knows he won't have to worry about them ever being thrown away because of Bonnie's mom's job at Sunnyside Daycare, and it shows how much he cares, that he knows they're in better hands with Bonnie than a tween who won't pay them any mind, or in the attic, or anywhere else he could think of. In one of Andy's first scenes of the film, when he rather callously said,
"Mom, no one's gonna want those old toys. They're junk."
it was only reflexively to get his mom off his back. He didn't want them donated or sold, not because he didn't think people would want them, but because he didn't want to lose them unless he knew they would be in caring hands. And when Molly is being a total nuisance to Andy about stealing all of his things, he isn't really upset about it. He kinda laughs off her requests in a way you might expect of an older brother without much malice behind his words. It's not until she chortles at the idea that Andy would have still held on to his toys that he becomes genuinely frustrated and snaps at her. He puts on a brave face in front of his family, but he's still a kid at heart. So at Bonnie's house, where none of his friends or family are around, he can fully embrace that inner part of him and openly express how important his toys are to him. To take the time to give each and every one of them a moment in the spotlight and talk about what they've meant to him over the years. You can say that Andy wouldn't talk like this because you remember how you acted when you were his age and it wasn't like this, or that he's too young to be this clingy and nostalgic, but to make either of those claims is to be massively reductive and oversimplify the complexity of human emotions that vary dramatically from person to person. Some people will be emotionally closed off and resistant to the idea of indulging in childlike wonders in their older years, and as such will be unable to let themselves empathize with anybody on that level or look at this scene as anything other than melodramatic, maudlin, sappy cringe. But not everyone. Every single human being on this planet is going to become attached to things to different extents and at different ages. I'm nostalgic for things that happened as little as a couple years ago, and when I was Andy's age, I was already looking back fondly on my middle and high school days. Is it really that hard to believe these toys really meant something to Andy, and he wanted to express that now that he's in a place where he doesn't have to worry about being judged by anyone, where he doesn't have family or friends to keep up an indifferent and reserved attitude in front of, and can reconnect with a sense of youthful joy he hadn't been able to channel for years? I was just a slightly older kid when I saw Toy Story 3 for the first time. I can't even imagine how I would have felt if I had been Andy's age in 2010, about to go off to college, and how that would have affected me. And no, this scene isn't an adult man creepily explaining to a toddler how to play with her toys because he believes her imagination to be secondary to his own. That's not what he does here. It's clear during the Haunted Bakery play session, and every subsequent time Bonnie plays with her toys, that her imagination isn't gonna be limited by what Andy tells her, and he knows that. The more important purpose of this is to allow him a chance to verbalize his feelings towards the toys as a means of saying goodbye. Andy's speech doesn't consist of clinical breakdowns of what type of toys they are. He describes who they are and what they meant to him personally with the enthusiasm of an inner kid, breaching through to the surface rather than a cool teen trying to seem aloof or emotionally withdrawn. And even though the toys are in their inanimate states, you can still feel from every one of them how happy they are to hear these words from Andy, keeping the camera low to the ground, both to highlight the nuances in their faces, such as Slink's default smile being tweaked slightly upwards to communicate the toy's feelings, and to give the audience a chance to say goodbye to these characters alongside Andy.
They mean a lot to me.
But of course, we're not quite done yet. Bonnie shuffles over toward the box to check if there's anything left, and to everyone's surprise,
my cowboy!
There is.
Woody?
I'll never forget how intense the gut punch was the first time I saw this, because for as emotional as it is watching Andy say goodbye to his toys one by one, you kinda already braced yourself for that possibility the moment Woody first grabbed the sticky note and Andy confirmed he was having the toys donated somewhere. But Woody being at the bottom of this box hits you like a freight train because of how completely unexpected it is. Everyone had already emotionally prepared themselves for a goodbye sequence of some kind, but nothing about the prior scenes indicated Woody would also be leaving Andy, and in fact they made a concerted effort to convince you otherwise because they knew the most effective way to hit you where it hurts would be to catch you while your emotional defenses were down, to not give you any time to mentally prepare for such a massive turning point, and to then force you to process the situation right here in the moment. And that cinematic sleight of hand is a huge reason why this ending was so devastating to people on their first viewing. Everything you've experienced throughout the entire third act has all been to prime you for this one final moment. All these emotional climaxes that seamlessly build off of each other in a seemingly never-ending gauntlet of terror are trying to break down your emotional walls and condition you to be as vulnerable as possible for these final scenes. But even when I know the tricks, it still knocks me off my feet every single time because of how thoughtfully constructed every facet of the dialogue and performances are. Bonnie quotes one of Woody's catchphrases back to Andy,
"You're the snake in my boot."
and Woody, through the same trickery he used on Sid in the first movie, manipulates his voice box to help Andy make this final connection and make the right decision to pass him on alongside the rest of his friends. Because Woody already made his choice to continue his duty of creating memories for a kid and by proxy making up for leaving Bonnie to return to Sunnyside earlier by now bringing her more toys than she's probably ever seen before. And Woody doesn't have to compromise his loyalty to do it. He won't leave Andy if he doesn't pass him over willingly. He could have been underhanded and duplicitous with his actions. He could have just snuck out of the college box through the open window when Andy wasn't looking, but he didn't, because he would never betray the trust of his kid like that. And if Andy still needed him, Woody would have gone with him. He knows the right thing to do is to go with Bonnie, but it's still Andy's decision, and Woody's gonna do whatever's best for him. Properly closing the book on the allegory of parenthood, because much like how Woody can't make the choice for Andy, parents have to let their kids make these choices for themselves. As the old saying goes, they can do everything in their power to lead a horse to water, but they can't make them drink. Andy's first move as Bonnie reaches for him is to pull back. He doesn't even think about it. It's an instinctive reaction to someone trying to take his most valuable thing away from him. He can part with all his other toys, but Woody is just too special to him. He was so confident in this donation idea a few minutes ago, but Bonnie reaching for Woody breaks that confidence and the kid inside Andy rises to the surface once more. But seeing Bonnie's pained expression, one that communicates an innocent sense of disappointment without resorting to her pouting or crying her way into getting what she wants, grounds him back in the moment and the reason why he came here in the first place, to give his toys to another kid and help her form memories as special and important as the ones they gave him. And he doesn't have to hold on to a physical reminder to keep those memories close to his heart. Because that's what it's all about, to make a child happy. In this moment, they both grow up and move on while never really leaving the other behind because they'll always have a friend in each other. So much about Andy's thought process has to come through exclusively through his facial expressions and his actions, like the fact that his hand lingers on Woody's boot for those extra few seconds, not letting go until it forcibly falls out from under him and Bonnie pulls him close for a hug. promising Andy she'll take care of him while he's away. When Andy delivers this last monologue about how important Woody is, he isn't really talking to Bonnie anymore. It's a conversation with Woody. He's almost talking to himself as a way to convince himself that
he'll never give up on you. Ever. He'll be there for you, no matter what.
So he can finally let him go. It's a speech for the audience. It's a speech to himself for reassurance, and it's unwittingly a speech for Woody and the toys to vindicate everything he believed and preached about, not just for the entire movie, but for the entire trilogy. To finally hear, with no ambiguity, no strings attached, that every last minute of it was worth it. And the reason why it's so genuine is because Andy doesn't think he's talking to living beings, so he doesn't have anyone to put on an act for. Everything he says is coming right from his heart. This is Woody's moment to breathe, which is why the camera focuses on him specifically for this intimate moment between these two characters. And just like the other toys, he chooses to describe Woody not simply as a cowboy or by sharing the wonders of his rootin' tootin' TV backstory, but by telling her the type of person Andy sees in him.
He's brave, like a cowboy should be, and kind and smart.
His oldest pal that would be there for him no matter what, even if he's thousands of miles away. Andy passing Woody on to Bonnie works in the story in a literal sense, but there's so many elements of growing up that can be projected onto this one shot. As Andy saying goodbye to his toys also means saying goodbye to his childhood before stepping into the great unknown of his adult life. Because that's what the trilogy has always been about. The inevitability of growing up, accepting that, and moving on to new horizons, which makes this scene such a perfect bookend to everybody's stories. The toys have completed their mission with Andy, but it doesn't mean their lives have to end so long as someone still needs them. There's no telling what life could look like for the toys in the future. They could one day rejoin the others at Sunnyside, they could be passed down to Bonnie's kids, or Andy's kids, or anything else. Bonnie growing up is an inevitability just like it was with Andy, and this won't solve all their problems forever. But now it's made clear that just because their time with one owner is up doesn't mean they can't continue to bring new memories to a different owner. Woody placing himself in that box with his friends is his way of communicating to Andy without saying a word that it's alright, and to encourage him to fully step out into the world on his own. Woody's done everything he can for Andy. They've done everything they can for each other, but now they have to let each other go. It's the best thing to do for everyone here, but not without one last playtime. Andy gives the toys the chance to hear the words they'd always dreamed of hearing, and then he also gets to give them the thing they wanted more than anything in the world, which is one last playtime. Just one last roundup rodeo, one last burst of childlike innocence to reinforce everything Woody always believed about Andy. The music swells and the dialogue fades into the background as the emotions carry you away because you're inside the toys' heads now. The overwhelming orchestra drowning everything else out, helping you feel the same overwhelming flood of emotions that the toys are. It doesn't matter what playtime they're having right now, and it doesn't matter what anyone else is saying. They are loved, they are safe, and they are home. Nothing else in the world matters right now. It's such a beautifully serene moment where you can get a sense of how each toy feels even though they aren't alive, holding on their faces even as nothing's happening to them and the humans are running wild in the background, complete with callbacks to Andy giving Woody a piggyback ride from the first movie and Bonnie making Woody and Buzz slap hands like Andy did. And there's a subtle progression throughout this ending sequence of Bonnie warming up to Andy despite her initial reservations, a very reticent and bashful kid who stops being afraid to let her inner joy flow through as she finds common ground with Andy in their shared love of imagination and toys. Something that even carries over into the sequel TV specials, showing Bonnie being much more willing to make friends and try new things, which is so far removed from how she was when we first met her in the lobby of Sunnyside. You can see in her face the progression of being shocked to see Andy so excitedly grab the toys and unleash his imagination, to then literally jumping with joy at seeing someone as expressive as she is and taking off like a rocket to jump head first into this last playtime. Some claim that Andy's decision to donate his toys makes all the adventures they'd had over the years trying to stay loyal to him at all costs entirely meaningless, but, to paraphrase a line from Vision, something isn't meaningful because it lasts. You can't hold on to something forever. The memories they've made together and the impact they've had on each other's lives will always be there, and for that they will always be eternally grateful. And what the toys get for all the trials and tribulations they'd endured is not for Andy to give up on them, but for Andy to ensure a loving new home for the toys that brought him so much joy. He's not carelessly throwing them away or passing them down, he's lovingly giving each one a specialized speech and playing with them all one last time. To drive the point home even further, after Andy and Bonnie's play session is complete and it's finally time for him to head off to college, he says,
"Thanks, guys."
As a thanks for all the happy memories they gave him, and that he now knows they're going to help create for a new kid. And in a meta sense, it's a message to the generation of Pixar fans who grew up with the first two Toy Story films and can pass on that love for these characters to their own kids, like my parents did for me, and that I hope to do with my own family someday. Passing the legacy of these characters and their impact on our lives through the generations, just as Andy passes his toys to Bonnie. Andy was never the main character of these movies. He actually doesn't even have all that much screen time across the trilogy, but he was still always the focal point of the narrative, the main motivation behind every action the characters took, the conflicts they tackled, and the philosophical questions they had to wrestle with, which is why this moment works as the perfect conclusion, an opportunity for the audience to say goodbye to him as well as the toys as the staple of the franchise that he is. Bonnie puppeteers Woody waving goodbye to Andy, which once again mirrors what he used to do, and also makes it feel like Woody himself is saying goodbye to Andy. He gets back in his car, starts up the engine, and pauses for a final moment to take one last loving look back at Bonnie's porch, preserving an eternal snapshot in his mind of all his toys together in a new home. And then he drives away as Bonnie is called inside for lunch, and the camera pans down one last time to align the audience's perspective with that of the toys, and the music swells to maximum intensity just like it did a moment ago when the playtime started, as you're once again brought inside their heads as Woody stares out at Andy's car starting to disappear over the horizon, leading us to that iconic but emotionally devastating final line.
So long, partner.
Which will consistently shatter any emotional barriers I had up if somehow the rest of the scene hadn't already penetrated them. It's the first time I can ever vividly remember crying real tears when watching a piece of media, and every time I watch this movie, let alone the entire trilogy back to back, those same emotions from when I was 7 years old come racing back to the surface as if I'm watching it all for the first time again. And as the camera starts to pull up and away, Woody excitedly rushes to introduce Buzz and the gang to all of Bonnie's toys, reinforcing that this really is a happy ending and the toys are content to be given a new chance at life. And we pan up into the final shot of the clouds decorating a beautiful blue sky, making the first and last imagery seen in this trilogy identical, bookending not only a beautifully told 3-part story, but also Woody's time with Andy as the music plays us out. Thankfully, though, in the interest of making sure the audience doesn't have to wade through a pool of tears to get out of the theater, we have an epilogue that plays during the credits to provide some much-needed levity after such a staggeringly emotional third act, and also to tie up the few loose story threads they didn't have time to resolve during the main adventure. Primarily, Sunnyside. We get to see how Barbie and Ken made an effort to fix the place up after Lotso was ostracized, and everyone woke up to how off his rocker he really was. You could even see Stretch becoming a lot more hesitant to push the toys into the dumpster the longer that scene went on. Everyone was gradually growing more and more uncomfortable the more deranged Lotso got. Not to say his henchmen were entirely innocent, but that's why they now play an equal part in the rough play, working with Ken and Barbie to treat everyone fairly as now they proudly take on the chin the same punishment they helped subject other toys to for so long. And Ken and Barbie are not filling a power vacuum as the new rulers of Sunnyside because Barbie doesn't believe in that kind of power structure.
Authority should derive from the consent of the governed, not from the threat of force.
It's amazing that in the final act of the trilogy, when there's so much work to be done for rounding out the story of our main characters and creating a layered and terrifying villain to exploit their darkest fears, they still found the time to give side characters like Barbie and Ken journeys to go on separately and together. There's so many more payoffs in that same vein during the epilogue, like the box now actually being used as a proper sandbox for people to hang out in during off hours, and Big Baby now having a new mother figure through Barbie, which also allows her to offer the sort of protective comfort and care she was missing when Molly donated her at the beginning, and the Army Men. Yeah, remember them? They didn't just zip off into the wind, never to be heard from again as they aimlessly wandered the world. They knew exactly where they were going, and they might have even been coming here specifically to try to link up with some of their old troops. And of course, who wasn't hoping to see even more cool outfits for Ken to wear? And look at that, the yellow bunny finally made his way into the butterfly room, thus completing the holy trinity of former escapees who eventually got to live the life of luxury. Oh yeah, there's also the monkey, who sadly wasn't there to witness Lotso's downfall, but looks like Barbie and Ken talked some sense into him while he was tied up in a drawer, as he has also turned over a new leaf. And he's still using the security cameras, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's good to still be able to keep an eye on things, especially to look out for any surprise human visits. The important thing is they're not being used as a part of a prison security system anymore. Or, if you want to go for a more bittersweet interpretation, it could also be that the monkey just really likes watching the cameras and gets more enjoyment participating in social events like this dance party from afar. My fellow introvert, I salute you. Fitting, then, that Bonnie was so drawn to him earlier, if that's the case. Of course, it might initially seem strange for the Sunnyside toys to be so chipper about everything, given that the last they saw of Andy's toys was them being carted off to the dump, but they also tie up that loose end by showing the pen pal system they've established through the use of Bonnie's backpack, so everyone can stay in touch, and so they know Woody's crew made it out alive. Speaking of Andy's toys, we also get a peek at what their new life looks like in Bonnie's room, where she has heartily welcomed them all equally as a part of the family, and where everyone's found someone to pair up with. Rex both gets a gaming friend in keeping with his interest from Toy Story 2, even calling back to a line from that movie.
My arms are never long enough! Look at my little arms! I can't press the fire button and jump at the same time!
And another dinosaur toy like he wanted at the end of the first movie. The Potato Heads get to expand their family with the peas in the pod.
I told you kids, stay out of my butt!
Ham has another sarcastic know-it-all to bond with, and Mr. Pricklepants has found people he can sucker into acting in his plays, chief among whom are the aliens, whose presence is kinda lacking in Toy Story 3 compared to their chatterbox nature of the previous two films, until their big triumphant payoff in the Incinerator. But it's not without purpose. They didn't just forget about the aliens entirely. They've always been seeking the approval of Mr. Potato Head.
You have saved our lives. We are eternally grateful.
And he's always trying to get them to shut up.
You just leave me alone!
You saved our lives. We are eternally grateful.
So they follow his instructions for most of Toy Story 3 and remain out of sight, out of mind, until he properly embraces them.
My boys.
and now they're more outspoken than we've ever heard outside of the non-canon Toy Story treats, getting up on stage for a room-scale play.
Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
And finally, the crown jewel of the epilogue. First, a callback to Buzz's handiwork from the first movie before Bullseye turns on the CD player and a feeling he can't quite control starts to come over him, leading to him and Jessie summoning their inner dance choreographer to play us out with the dance number of a lifetime. Expertly crafted by professional Dancing with the Stars dancers Cheryl Burke and Tony Dovolani, whose names are perfectly synced to appear on screen right as the Paso Doble dance routine they choreographed comes to a close, all set to a Spanish remix of the classic You've Got a Friend in Me, staying true to the series' core identity merged with a special Toy Story 3 flavor, reassuring people that Buzz still has a bit of that Spanish DNA in him and can tap into it whenever he needs to. I don't know where Woody got that roast from, and I don't care, because after draining your eyes of all their tears, Buzz and Jessie's flamenco duet is the best way to revitalize anyone watching so they aren't left completely overcome with bittersweet sadness. A final burst of energy to close out the story on the highest note possible. And so, at long last, almost 6 hours later, that finally brings us to the end of Toy Story 3, and I am still so happy that this film was received as well as it was. With all the historic records it smashed, all the accolades it achieved, and all the tears it spawned in theaters across the globe. I was too young when Toy Story 3 first came out to be consciously aware of any of this, but a lot of people were looking at the announcement of this movie the same way I was looking at Toy Story 4's announcement, and how a lot of you are probably looking at Toy Story 5's announcement. The pressure surrounding the production of this film was insurmountable both from outside Pixar and within the studio's walls. They weren't fighting with the earliest forms of cutting-edge technology, with the fate of the studio's survival at stake like with Toy Story. They weren't on a bullet train, racing against an impossible deadline to remake almost the entire movie from scratch like with Toy Story 2. But they were facing their greatest creative enemy: themselves. Pixar's reputation was legendary throughout the early 2000s, releasing smash hit after smash hit after smash hit. But the Toy Story movies especially were widely considered to be untouchable and among the greatest animated films ever put to screen. One that changed the art of animation forever, and another that showed just how unafraid Pixar was to rip your heart out and hold up a giant mirror to the ugly truths of our lives, all while operating within the boundaries of a G rating. And Toy Story 2 seems to end Woody and Buzz's story on such a beautifully poignant note, that they'll always have each other for infinity and beyond. How can you possibly top that? To some, it seemed ridiculous to even attempt such a monumental task, to risk tampering with the legacy of a series that birthed the studio, that inspired hundreds if not thousands of professional filmmaking careers, and defined millions of childhoods all around the world. Lee Unkrich has spoken at length across various interviews about how unbelievably excited, but also cripplingly nervous he was to have been asked to take the reins of the director's chair for the finale of the Toy Story trilogy. He was petrified not only of going down in history as the director to break Pixar's flawless streak of movie releases by creating their first critical bomb, which thankfully he didn't. Someone else did, but also of being the one to screw up the Toy Story universe because he knew how much people loved these characters and this world. And thankfully, he wasn't. Someone else was, and it makes me smile to see instead how genuinely thrilled he was to receive the Best Animated Feature award on stage. But it's not just him who's worthy of praise. Everyone who worked on this film, the veteran Pixar brain trust, artists who were there for the inception of the first Toy Story, and newcomers who flocked to this project with the hopes of leaving their mark on a series that meant so much to them in their earlier years. The tech department that elevated the animation without losing the the style that defined the series since 1995, the voice cast that continues to give it their all and honor those who passed away, and of course, the creative heads in charge of the writing. Every original Pixar genius who buckled down and put their heads together to figure out how best to conclude this story. What would be worthy of standing alongside the movies that preceded it and deliver an exceptional finale to one of the most incredible film trilogies ever conceived. And chief among those storytellers is Michael Arndt, the screenwriter of the movie. Strange as it may be to look outside Pixar for a brand new writer to entrust a franchise as important as Toy Story 2, he wound up being the perfect person to pen the script for this film. His breakout, Oscar-winning script for Little Miss Sunshine has all the hallmarks Lee Unkrich would have been looking for his own film. It's a movie that focuses on an ensemble family of eccentric characters going through increasingly hilarious and crazy situations while out on the road, while also forcing them all to confront incredibly serious and incredibly major changes to their lives that challenge not only the futures they saw for themselves, but the way in which they view the world around them. It's a fantastic script for a fantastic film that manages to keep the story extremely emotionally grounded and real in spite of its occasional absurd nature, which made Michael Arndt the perfect pick for telling a story about a group of talking toys breaking out of a daycare prison that ultimately has something very human to say about life at its center. Toy Story 3 marked the end of an era, but it also marked the beginning of my interest in the art of filmmaking. I never liked watching behind-the-scenes videos when I was younger because it was all real-life adults talking about stuff. They weren't the friendly, bouncy characters I knew. They were big, scary adults, and even just hearing their voices talking over each other during an audio commentary was too much for me to handle. But Toy Story 3 sparked a fierce passion that made me want to know more about how such a movie could ever come to be. My parents got me a magazine that delved into the specifics of that process, and Lee Unkrich and Darla K. Anderson's Cinexplore commentary was the first one of its kind that I watched and wasn't immediately turned off by. There was something about their delivery that didn't make it feel too overbearing for me to listen to.
And the K stands for?
K-A-Y.
I don't think I'm going to be able to remember that. Anyway, so we're here doing the commentary for Toy Story 3.
And I was fascinated hearing about the craftsmanship that went into making this film. I listened to it again and again, gleaning new insight each time I did, and sought out other behind-the-scenes stuff for this and every other subsequent film I watched in the future that I was passionate about in some way, all of which only went on to further strengthen my love for the medium of filmmaking as the years went by. And perhaps the most impressive thing about Toy Story 3 is that the movie, in its current form, was never even supposed to exist. It's pretty well documented that for a long time, the idea of a third Toy Story movie was merely being used as, in the words of Andrew Stanton, the most expensive bargaining chip ever created in the negotiations between Disney and Pixar during the early 2000s as their 7-movie contract was close to expiring, and Disney was trying to lure Pixar back to them, because the way things were under that contract, Pixar's rights to these characters were automatically relinquished to Disney should they decide they didn't want to create a sequel that the corporate mice had ordered. So when it became apparent the two entities were unlikely to maintain their business relationship, Michael Eisner made good on that clause and threw Pixar to the wind, instead forming Circle 7 Animation, or Pixarnt as it was more colloquially known in the industry, with the intent of continuing to milk those characters for all they were worth, and using them to bolster the success of their own animated movies after most of their early 2000s releases had fallen flat on their faces. I said most, leave me alone, thinking they didn't need Pixar's brilliant minds to keep making great movies with their characters. And at that point, this alternate version of Toy Story 3 was no longer just a bargaining chip. It had changed quite significantly since the year 2000, but it wasn't a hypothetical anymore. We got dangerously close to this version being made into a real finished film by the people working at Circle 7. I say dangerously close because based on what information is publicly available about that early version, by which I mean the entire script, I'm not impressed by a mirrored version of Toy Story 2 that mostly just felt like a filler episode of a TV show and was also complete with strip poker, breaching the rules of never talking to humans in a much more ridiculous context than the first movie, and also casual racism by Woody? Holy shit, who fucking wrote this? But in all seriousness, I truthfully have not done an extensive amount of research into this topic, into any of the versions, the whodunit murder mystery, the revised attempt at making that idea not utterly dreadful, the Wizard of Oz-esque idea of Woody and Buzz going to Star Command in outer space. What the fuck? Or the most infamous one, the Buzz Lightyear recall story put forth by Circle 7. I've consciously chosen to remain ignorant to a lot of the specifics because I don't find much value in the idea of speculating on hypotheticals and what-if scenarios. That's the kind of thing you do when the final version sucks Luxo balls and you're desperately trying to figure out what went wrong and how alternate versions could have been so much better. But when the movie Pixar ultimately ended up making is this good, I choose instead to simply be grateful for what we did get. Were it not for Toy Story 3 being imprisoned in the world of legal disputes for as long as it was, Pixar might have ended up going full steam ahead on that Wizard of Oz thing. We might have gotten something much, much worse. And regardless of anything else, I can say with extreme confidence they never would have thought to skip ahead nearly a decade in universe had it not wound up taking almost that long to start making the movie, and had the filmmakers not gone through similar experiences with their own kids in the time that passed since the production of Toy Story 2. And that's the true magic of Toy Story 3. This movie served as the culmination of both the in-universe journeys of these characters over the course of a trilogy and the lives of the real people who'd fallen in love with them, all coming together for one spectacular moment in cinematic history that allowed the two paths to cross over so seamlessly and allowed the audiences of 2010 to react as deeply and earnestly as they did. You couldn't intentionally create this kind of timing even if you wanted to, and had Toy Story 3 been made at any other point in the 21st century before this point, we would have completely missed out on it. So no, I don't worry about going down the rabbit hole of pondering what might have been. I thank my lucky stars every single day for what almost wasn't. How close we came to missing out on this beautiful conclusion to the Toy Story trilogy, and how the geniuses at Pixar managed to gracefully convert a project born out of financial obligation and entrepreneurial strife into a finale that felt like it had been written on the wall since the very inception of the series. This marked the first time in Pixar's history where they were developing a film because it needed to be made, and not because they had a story they really wanted to tell, which was very decisively against Pixar's MO. At the time. It's not that they didn't want to make the movie. They'd been wanting to do that for years, ever since Toy Story 2 was released. But because Disney shut down Circle 7 after they properly bought Pixar in 2006, and because Toy Story 3 had been trapped in development hell for so long, the responsibility of seeing the production of this film through to completion now fell to them. And when they realized the idea they'd been ruminating about for years, that Wizard of Star Command thing, wasn't strong enough to sustain a full feature, they were stuck with a film that needed to be made and no story to tell with it. It might just be the absolute least organic way possible to go about making a movie. It's a miracle, then, that they didn't just phone it in the face of such an extraordinary creative crisis. They didn't make something that was just good enough to satisfy the executives and rake in easy money. They didn't cobble a plot together out of the various scrapped versions that had existed over the years with minimal efforts in exercising their own creativity. They didn't even look at any of that material at all. They swung for the fences with huge story risks, with having Andy age up so drastically, with playing to higher emotions and creating a darker, scarier atmosphere and tone to appeal to the adults in the audience who had aged up alongside Andy without abandoning a new generation of kids in the process. and with ending the film by radically changing the status quo moving forward in a way no one would have ever expected. And that all of those huge story risks paid off and not only strengthened the Toy Story series as a whole, not only perfectly rounded out character arcs and story threads running across the whole trilogy we didn't even realize we wanted to see resolved, but emotionally devastated audiences young and old all around the world, proving how deeply people had grown to care about these fictional animated toys, leaving an impact on the franchise and all those who experience it that will last for generations to come to infinity and beyond. There are, of course, better films than Toy Story 3. Even among its fellow 2010 Best Picture nominees, there were other movies more deserving of the Oscar that year, although The King's Speech certainly wasn't fucking one of them. But it will still probably always be my all-time favorite movie, and while I can easily make a case for any of the 3 Toy Story movies as being the best of the trilogy, my allegiance will always lie with this one. Sadly, it's very likely that the only reason why Toy Story 3 received this prestigious nomination is because the Academy faced such severe backlash for snubbing Wall-E from the same category 2 years prior, and was just floundering about trying to prove they actually did respect the medium of animation by simply handing the Best Picture nomination to Pixar every year until the studio made something so terrible that they couldn't even justify a nomination for Best Animated Feature, and thus marked the end of what might be the only period in my lifetime when the Academy was willing to honor an animated movie with the title of Best Picture. It's also possible the Academy didn't even fucking watch it! But even if Toy Story 3 only made it into the category as a performative act, I would argue to the death that it deserved the nomination entirely on its own merits.
It's been a big honor, especially this year with Toy Story 3, that we've been talked about and placed alongside a lot of great live-action films. It only seems right to us because we feel like we've been doing that all along.
Toy Story is a series that feels like it grew up with its audience. The first movie presented a situation very easily applicable to younger kids. Whether it's feeling like you're losing your friends to new students you meet in school, or losing out on attention from your parents when a new baby arrives in the house, it's not hard for children to relate that struggle to Woody feeling threatened by Buzz Lightyear in Andy's room, and Woody overcoming that jealousy to realize the universe doesn't revolve around him and he has to learn to share is really important for people to see during the early stages of their lives. The second movie then takes things a step further, knowing kids who loved the first one would be a few years older and a little more mature now, likely being more cognizant of and possibly even terrified by their mortality, making the themes of enjoying every minute you have on this planet even when everyone is born with an unavoidable expiration date a logical step up in accordance with the emotional development of its core fanbase. And finally, with Toy Story 3, while it of course still has the vibrant colors and spirited personalities that will appeal to younger kids, this movie is also acutely aware of the fact that the kids who grew up watching the original 2 movies in theaters in the 90s would either be heading off to or already in college when this one came out. And so they wrote a story that would appeal to the insecurities and fears of people around Andy's age. But even to people like me, who were only 7 years old when the third movie came out, it still rang true to my heart, and I've only gone on to draw more and more meaning out of it the older I've become. It has the tightest plot, most emotional power, which is really saying something, and fantastic character work, which all comes together to create the most satisfying conclusion to this story imaginable. Something that is as good as it is because of the previous movies, which is not to be taken as a point of insult. It works so well as a trilogy because of how seamlessly the 3 films flow together. They keep getting better and better because they keep building off the foundation of their predecessors, with Toy Story 3 remaining firmly rooted in the fundamentals that made the series so special in the past while still being able to stand on its own 2 feet. And also, as I spent the last 6 hours proving, there is so much more to this film than its powerful finale sequences, and you certainly do not have to be a die-hard Toy Story fan to appreciate how hilarious, inventive, and exciting the entire rest of the story is, even if you won't be able to catch every last little callback and payoff. It's one of the most seamless movies ever with how it's able to move between intense, hilarious, and heartbreaking scenes all without it ever feeling disjointed, and shows no concern for going all out with its much more serious tone compared to that of the first two movies. And while it may be the least funny of the trilogy overall, even with all of its incredibly exorbitant comedy, that's because the main focus is on the tension, the suspense, the high stakes, and the emotions. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for a mainstream animated kids movie that has those things as its primary focus, that pushed the toys as far as they reasonably could with things like the Incinerator scene, that was willing to dip into darker and more serious territory, willing to scare its audience with scenes and musical stings reminiscent of classic horror films as opposed to just playing up the laughs and whimsical spectacle of it all. And that was unwilling to throw any semblance of logic out the window, believing the creation of a coherent script to be a gross misallocation of valuable resources simply because of who the target audience is. Because kids don't deserve to be fed poorly written, illogical sludge just because they're younger and will watch whatever is put on the screen in front of them. They deserve to be met, not with bumbling idiots who talk down to them and treat them like mindless blobs of flesh whose attention need only be maintained rather than truly captivated. They deserve characters who respond to situations with a level of maturity and intelligence we should be encouraging in younger generations. Leon Critch's instruction to Michael Arndt when writing the script was, don't make these characters ignorant of the wider world. Don't make them stupid or too impulsive or too childish. These characters are as smart and complex as any live-action characters might be. And to dismiss all of that by simply saying, who cares, it's meant for little babies, is to spit in the face of those who do care to put in such an extraordinary amount of effort into their storytelling, to discourage aspiring artists who don't view children as a lesser audience and who set out to create the best possible movies for them to enjoy, to learn from, and to be inspired by. Stories that will resonate with audiences young and old and potentially stick with them for the rest of their lives.
People pointed out a lot of the kind of more mature themes in that film, as they have in Toy Story 3, and they think, well, this is so innovative, you're doing this in a kid's film. And the reality is we don't think of them as kids' films, we just think of them as films.
If anything, there's an even greater responsibility to put effort into making something amazing that's aimed at kids because of how impressionable and malleable their minds are during their early years, and because of how many kids will find comfort, belonging, and role models in the fictional worlds and characters presented to them through their television screens when their real lives aren't providing any of those things. Some kids may not have a safe, loving family to return to at the end of a hard day. Some kids may not have a supportive environment to thrive in at school. And some kids may have spent a lot of their early years in and out of the hospital because of a rare liver disease they were born with. Doctors and nurses may have always spoken to their parents in medical jargon they couldn't really understand, but they could still tell from how their parents reacted that whatever was happening wasn't good. But the one thing they always had as consolation was a set of VHS tapes available for rental at the hospital. Toy Story and Toy Story 2, that as they were taken away and subjected to various tests, as they would be constantly carted into x-ray rooms and finally put under anesthesia for surgery, they always had these movies waiting in their room to come back to. And they had a Woody doll to hold on to that their parents bought for them because it was clear how strongly they were reacting to the films. How much they were laughing at what the toys were saying and all the crazy adventures they got themselves into, and how comforting all of that was to them during a time where so much was so uncertain for all of them. If you ever wondered why this series means as much to me as it does, that's why. Even if I wasn't consciously aware of it at the time, Woody, Buzz, and everyone else were helping make my childhood a little bit easier. The first two Toy Story movies hold more value to me than just being really amazing movies. They allowed me to turn what was otherwise a really scary period of time into something I can now look back on with only fond memories. So I didn't need any of those TV spots or trailers or 3D re-releases to get myself hyped. My own experiences with these characters were all I needed to want to leap at the first chance I had to watch another adventure with them. And it's why I didn't care how daunted I felt being among such a massive crowd, because this was far too special of a day for me to let anything sour my mood. Seeing a brand new Toy Story film in theaters in my lifetime would have been a dream come true anyway, but Toy Story 3 also showed me how powerful stories like this could be. It marked the first time I ever cried at any piece of media because of how beautiful the finale was, because I was seeing characters that meant the world to me receive such a triumphant yet bittersweet and all-around perfect ending to their stories. I still, to this day, can't watch this ending sequence without crying my eyes out. I have never been able to do it, and I don't think I ever will. I may not have understood the deeper nuances of the character arcs and thematic through lines when I was 7 years old, but I understood what it felt like to lose people, and I understood what it felt like to experience that fear of change, something that's persisted across my entire life. Whether I was expanding my social horizons for the first time, joining an after-school acting class, starting at a brand new middle or high school, or even of starting a YouTube channel and putting myself out into the world only for my life to be whisked away in directions I never expected that allowed me to meet so many incredible people I never in a million years dreamed I'd get the chance to talk to. None of it's been easy. But every step of the way, every difficult and scary change I've been through has all contributed to getting me to where I am today. And I owe it all to this franchise. My love and adoration for these characters that inspired me and brightened my darkest days. These stories that delighted me and lifted me up from my lowest lows. And these thematic messages that spoke to me and served as the North Star of my life. All leading me to share that passion with over 1 million people and ultimately giving me the chance to keep sharing that passion with anyone who's willing to listen. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you to Lee Unkrich and his team for making this movie. Thank you to everyone who brought Toy Story into the world in the first place. Thank you to my parents for introducing these stories to me at a time I needed them most, even when I didn't realize it. Ones that would always be there for me, no matter what. That even as I continue to expand my film diet, meet new people, and explore new places, I always know where to find my old friends. And thank you all, sincerely, for watching my love letter to Toy Story 3. It still may not be your favorite of the series, but hopefully you've been enlightened to the many, many reasons why it will always be my favorite. And hopefully you learned something about it that you didn't know before. But if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about how much I love this film for 6 hours. Because if you couldn't tell, it means a lot to me. So thanks guys, really, for watching, and so long, partners. that was certainly a long time coming. It's been 3 years since I first presented the possibility of a project dedicated entirely to praising Toy Story 3. We all knew this day was coming eventually, but now it's finally here, and I couldn't be happier to share this series with all of you to celebrate the film's 15th anniversary. Speaking of which, hey Pixar, would have been really cool if you put the film back in theaters to commemorate the occasion. Anytime this year would have been nice. There's never a bad day to re-release Toy Story 3 in theaters. Maybe you could bring the whole trilogy back to celebrate the first movie's 30th anniversary in November, or at least do some kind of marathon at some point before the 5th movie comes out like you did for the last 2 movies. Pretty please? Well, in any case, I've officially completed the Holy Trinity. A praise video for my favorite game of all time, a praise video for my favorite show of all time, and a praise series for my favorite film of all time, which I will be converting into a single 6.5-hour video sometime later this year. I said I didn't know what I was gonna make next at the end of my Owl House love letter, which was true, but when I presented to you all the different possibilities rattling around inside my head, I was secretly kinda hoping people would want me to cover Toy Story 3 next, because that was where I felt my passion being most strongly pulled toward. And thankfully, I got my wish. People pretty much unanimously said they wanted to see me make a praise video dedicated to Toy Story 3 next, so over the last year, I re-immersed myself into the world of Toy Story after being sucked into the Owl House for a year, and oh boy was it good to be back. With all the Toy Story 5 news that's been coming out recently, and now this series, it's felt really nice to return to my roots after being away for so long. It should be said before we go any further that I owe an incalculable amount of gratitude to a lot of different people without whom this series could not have possibly existed as is, particularly when it comes to the filming of the live-action segments. First and foremost, I have to thank the wonderful people at B&B Theaters for granting us special permission to film inside their establishment before the doors were open to the public. They didn't ask for money, they didn't ask for public endorsements, they didn't ask for anything in return. I just reached out to their marketing and communications specialist Diminished via email, outlining exactly what I wanted to use their space for, and after ironing out the logistics, she was more than happy to accommodate us. I honestly thought I was reaching for the stars here, and there wasn't a chance we'd be allowed to do this, but let that be a lesson to anyone out there who's looking to make their own stuff. As long as you're respectful and realistic with your requests, people are often a lot more understanding and supportive of independent creators than you may think, whether you have a lot of money to your name or not. So don't ever be afraid to shoot your shot in getting the resources you need to make your project a reality. The worst they can say is no. So thank you again to Diminished and B&B Theaters Wesley Chapel for helping make my project a reality. Of course, access to a filming location doesn't mean much without having someone to operate the camera, which is why I also have to thank FG and Brooks for putting up with me for hours on end across 3 separate days of filming and doing such a great job translating my ideas onto the screen.
Alright, that didn't...
It would have been funny if it worked that time.
That didn't quite go according to plan.
Whether you were crawling around the incredibly claustrophobic and restrictive environment of the attic or making an arduous trek out to the middle of absolutely nowhere to go visit the old theater I went to when I was growing up, your willingness to help bring this series to life knew no boundaries, and I am eternally grateful for the support and encouragement you've always shown towards my projects. Also, Brooks wanted you to know that this is what I looked like while filming the footage required for this shot. And finally, I can never give enough thanks to Anonymous, Avert, Gugonic, and OJ for peer-reviewing these videos from as early as when all I had to show for it was rudimentary previs layouts, helping me refine the cold open into what it ultimately became, catching editing mistakes, and generally offering up any and all suggestions to help make the series as great as possible. With a special shout out to Gugonic because, as you might have been able to tell, the scope of this video wound up becoming far more ambitious than anything I'd ever made before, and there's absolutely no way I could have gotten it across the finish line in time for the film's 15th anniversary without his help. He helped me fill in some gaps for part 2 when it came time to use Hi-Fi Rush visuals, because for as much as I like that game, he basically knows it inside and out. He also took on a lot of the most complicated visual effects shots and delivered exceptional results for every single one of them. The great tragedy being that while some of them obviously stand out immediately as having been digitally altered to some degree, a lot of the most impressive effects he created for this series look so incredibly seamless, I guarantee you that without me specifically pointing you toward the shots he worked on, you would never in a million years be able to tell he did anything at all. So please share your love for his visual effects work in the comments down below, because you seriously have no idea how much effort went into putting this whole project together. We also wish to express that at no point was generative AI used in any capacity during the creation of this video series. And even beyond all that, he was also willing to just sit in a Discord call with me for hours at a time as we reviewed all the footage I captured with FG and Brooks, figuring out what was best to use, and broke down those live action segments as hyper meticulously as possible until we found something we were happy with. Your contributions have all made this video better, and I seriously cannot express how thankful I am to have friends I so thoroughly enjoy being around, and whose opinions on my work I value and trust. Avert even has a channel of his own that I would be remiss not to plug here. You guys been enjoying your Switch 2s over the last month and a half? Well, my good friend Avert has recently released an hour-and-a-half long video documenting his journey with the console, from acquiring it, unboxing it, and going over his initial impressions with both the hardware and the software.
And it also makes for really good ASMR content.
Get out of here. Go, you, get out of the thing. Get out of the thing. I'm not gonna put my phone down. Stop asking me to put my phone down. Okay, fine, I'll put my phone down.
And if you want to go even further and take a trip down memory lane, you can also go back through all his other Switch 2 videos as new information was being released, and treat it as a sort of time capsule to see how well his predictions have aged. If you haven't been able to acquire a Switch 2 but still have the same fountain of passion for Nintendo stuff that Avert does, you'll also find plenty of in-depth reviews and discussions for Nintendo's biggest recent first-party releases, and even other third-party franchises such as Ace Attorney. In fact, his video dissecting the evolution of Ace Attorney collections over the years is probably my favorite thing I've seen from him to date. I'm sure there's no bias there at all. And that's still nowhere close to covering the full scope of what he offers on his channel. He's talked about movies, he's covered significant industry events, he's made his own music, and he's done a couple of what he likes to call yapathons, which are basically extended streams of consciousness videos that are perfect to listen to if you're just chilling at home and want to get lost in thought for a couple hours while someone talks about whatever scintillating topics and ideas have been on their mind recently. So please, go check out his channel. Show him you want to see more videos from him and help this passion project of his grow as much as possible. I at least owe him that much for everything he's contributed both to our commentaries, these mainline analysis videos, and this community as a whole. Now, as for the rest of you out there, if you enjoyed hearing me gush about why I love Toy Story 3 so much for 6 hours, you may also enjoy hearing me gush about why I love the Owl House so much for 8 hours. I always say I pour my heart and soul into every project I work on, which I do, but I really gave that video every last ounce of myself because of how deeply that show spoke and continues to speak to me, and I genuinely do not think I'll ever be able to top the writing, editing, or general presentation on display in it, especially when it comes to how the video ends. Of course, it certainly helps that I not only made a former Owl House crewmate cry when she watched that video, but that it also got the attention of Dana Terrace herself. I still can't fucking believe that. Point is, I'm every bit as passionate in that video as I was in this series, and if you enjoyed my love letter to Toy Story 3, I can virtually guarantee you will enjoy my love letter to the Owl House as well. But, you might want to watch the show first if you haven't already. If you're more in the market for a type of praise video you can watch without having to already be intimately familiar with the media in question, then my aforementioned Dragon's Lair 3D video might be more up your alley. It's a game that most people, even those who grew up playing the original arcade game in the 80s, have never even heard of before, and because I unapologetically adore nearly everything about it, I made that video to shine a light on the game and get more people to to play it, which also means, unlike my Owl House video, it's designed to be viewable without knowing even a single thing about the game and to make you want to play it for yourself, rather than exclusively providing a deeper analysis for those who already have played it, as long as you skip over the story section. And so far, I've been very successful in that endeavor. I've received plenty of comments and messages from people saying my video convinced them to try the game and they walked away really liking it. One of the original developers found it and enjoyed it, and I have yet to get someone to play this game and not have them walk away satisfied with their experience overall. And now we have the obligatory part of the video where I inform you that I have a Patreon page. If you would like to help me turn this channel from being a part-time commitment to a full-time commitment, then please consider supporting me over there. Every little bit helps contribute to that dream, especially when dealing with YouTube's broken copyright system and its scattershot AdSense program, and when these videos take as much time as they do to create. There are no special rewards waiting for you over there, which is admittedly counterintuitive to the selling point of Patreon as a service in the first place, but I have zero interest in trying to guilt people into donating to me by offering special Discord roles, private voice chats, exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with doing that, it's just not what I'm intending to do with Patreon. I created that page as an avenue through which you can donate only if you are financially able to and if you want to support me, but you should not feel forced in any way to do so. That does beg the question of, well, what are we supporting? What's coming up next on the channel that we can look forward to? Well, I read through every single comment on the community post I made prompting people to tell me what project they were most looking forward to, and as of the time of recording, it seems like a Pixar ranking video is the clear winner, which I honestly wasn't expecting. I made that post fully anticipating either Lightyear or Ralph Breaks the Internet to completely decimate the other options. But reading through that comment section was legitimately so refreshing because not only were those two projects not the winners, with Lightyear especially getting far less comments than I expected, not only are people genuinely wanting me to make videos I figured would be completely dead in the water in terms of audience interest, not only was there an incredibly diverse array of responses, but people were suggesting ideas for videos I've wanted to make forever that I didn't even mention in the post. And seeing Halo Infinite of all things get almost as many votes as Lightyear just makes my heart flutter, because while the only thing in this world that can rival Toy Story in terms of how deeply it's affected my life is the Owl House, the passion I have for Halo is almost as strong as what I feel toward Toy Story. And hopefully one day I will get people as interested in hearing me talk about Halo as they are for me talking about Toy Story. Now, reading through those comments also makes me feel bad because I know there are still a lot of people who really want me to rip Ralph Breaks the Internet to shreds that will probably be disappointed by the results, but even knowing that's probably going to be the case, I still feel fired up with motivation because that community post has given me all the confidence in the world to fully commit to making every single one of the things I suggested, knowing there will be people out there who want to watch it no matter how off-brand it is for the types of stuff I usually cover. So even if your preferred choice didn't win the popularity vote this time around, rest assured, I have no plans of stopping anytime soon. I do, however, want to make a special note about the Lightyear critique. I still have rock-solid plans to revisit that movie in a video and tar and feather it to death because of how much I hate it and how much else is wrong with it that I didn't cover in my original, very rushed rant from 2022. It just may not come out in the form you're expecting. And, that's all I'll say about it for now. In the meantime, if you want to keep up to date on everything I'm working on, your best bet is to join my Discord server where I will occasionally post about my progress on video projects, and where there's a really fun community who's always eager to chat about movies, games, and really whatever nerdy topics pique your interest. And if nothing else, you will always have commentary videos to look forward to in the meantime. They definitely have a very different energy and style, as those are unstructured, freeform reactions of me and my friends watching all kinds of movies. For instance, remember in my D23 video last year where I made the colossal mistake of admitting I'd never watched Lilo and Stitch? Well, the lovely and wonderful FG cordially and peacefully and not at all obsessively and forcefully fixed that for me by sitting me down to watch it for the first time in one of those commentaries.
Of raising a child.
Oh my god!
Damn, Stitch really just booked it.
Wow. That's kind of what this whole thing is. After having a dismal day, they took. Oh my god! Holy shit! Whoa!
Yeah, Trevor just saying shit and then jumps forward.
It was going well.
We watched the good. We watched the bad.
Oh fuck!
Jumping the shark is what this is.
What if we made it so Emmett could just fucking walk anywhere on his own?
Look how stupid this looks, dude. Look at this shit.
Go back. Oh yeah.
What the fuck? You could what is this, fucking Chucky? You could make a good horror movie out of this, dude. Just a floating Lego guy going around like this.
And we also watched the ones that fall somewhere in between.
Use your jetpack.
I'm sorry, what was that? Use your what? Use your what?
No fucking shot.
To infinity! It's turbo time!
Usually I like to post cryptic teasers on my Discord server about what the next commentary is gonna be. You know, FNAF style. But since this next one is something we've gotten copious amounts of requests for over the years, I want to openly confirm right here, right now, that the next big commentary project releasing sometime this fall is going to be a triple feature of all 3 Sonic movies. Gugonic was already hard at work on that until we dialed in 100% on getting this Toy Story 3 love letter released on time, and now that it's out, we can both head back over to the wonderful world of Sonic and finish this fight. Shut the fuck up, you dumbass Knuckles show. The flame's a disaster! You can find a full playlist of all our commentaries in the description and in the card up there, and you can also find a full playlist of every background music track I used across this trilogy of videos, as well as a Google Doc that cites the exact timestamps during which each track plays, just like I did with my Owl House video. So if you liked any of the music you heard today and wanted to know where it came from, feel free to check out that playlist. And at long last, that officially brings us to the end of the video. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for watching my love letter to Toy Story 3. Be sure to check out my other analysis videos and commentaries if you're interested, and I hope to see you all soon for whatever it is you decide to watch next. Now, one last time, everybody, for those we hold close, and for those we'll never meet, so long, partners.